Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the UNESCO Rising from the Depths workshop on marine cultural heritage and world heritage sites in East Africa. For us, it's an exciting moment and exciting activity in partnership with our colleagues from UNESCO, from the UNESCO headquarters and UNESCO Nairobi office, in order to bring the results and findings of many of the Rising from the Depths projects in East Africa to harness the contribution of marine cultural heritage to sustainable development, in this case in link to world heritage sites and processes. Before I give the floor to the director of the UNESCO Nairobi office, I would like just to remind everybody to put the microphones off and just raise their hands and use the chat also for any comments later on during the debate. After the opening session, we will be taking a group picture, so I will be calling everybody to open the cameras as well, and then we will start the first session. So it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Professor Hubert Gitsen, Director of the UNESCO Nairobi Multi-Sectoral Office for East Africa and UNESCO representative to Kenya. Professor Gitsen, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a very good morning to everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are. Let me first check, can I be heard and be seen?
Yes, clear.
All right, thank you. Dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, Mabibi na Mabwana. I think most of you are Kiswahili speakers who are joining. Greetings from the UNESCO Regional Office for Eastern Africa, and welcome to this regional workshop, which is on a very important topic on marine cultural heritage and also world heritage for sustainable development. And as you may know, this is a special year for the World Heritage Convention because this year, 2022, it's the 50th birthday of the convention. So we are commemorating this year the 50th anniversary, and therefore it is an opportunity and a good time for us to celebrate the successes, but also take stock of the challenges and build strategies and implement actions that will really cement the key role of heritage and culture in sustainable development. You all know that heritage and culture are really gifts from the past generations and a legacy for our future. From historic monuments and museums to living heritage and contemporary art forms, culture really enriches our lives in so many ways. It helps build inclusive, innovative, I would also add tolerant and resilient communities. Protecting and safeguarding the world's cultural and natural heritage and supporting creativity and dynamic cultural sectors are therefore fundamental to addressing the challenges of our time. Now, this regional workshop on World Heritage Sites and marine cultural heritage in East Africa provides a valuable nexus where world heritage, marine and underwater cultural heritage, as well as intangible cultural heritage generate synergies. And these synergies are there to ensure that we take a holistic approach to the adaptation and implementation of the standard setting instruments. So the convention, and also the policies developed to safeguard, to preserve, to protect and promote heritage and culture. Now, our cultural heritage is under constant threat. For example, World Heritage properties are affected by the impacts of climate change, that is now at present and in the future. Because climate change is here to stay with us for a while. As you may know, climate change has facilitated the spread of, for instance, invasive species and changes ecosystems on site at World Heritage sites. It has caused sea level rise, ocean warming and acidification, contributing to coral decline. There have been recently major discussions in the World Heritage Convention, for instance, on the Great Barrier Reef. But climate change has also increased the frequency and the severity of fires, of floods, and natural disasters in some sites. For instance, in less than a year ago, there was a major fire on the Table Mountain in South Africa, in Cape Town. And I visited the site, and I was informed that these fires happen regularly because of drought issues and climate change impact. So other threats include terrorism, wars and conflict, and in particular for underwater heritage, I would also like to mention that there is looting, for instance, of shipwrecks, which is also a major issue. And in addition, there are harmful industrial activities around heritage sites. We also see sometimes poor management and human interference, including from mass tourism. Moreover, national development projects, which are sometimes implemented without having done a heritage and environmental impact assessment, and then there is a risk that these continue to affect heritage sites negatively as well. In addition, I mentioned weak legal protective status of properties and ineffective preservation policies, which really make the situation worse. This workshop, therefore, provides us with a platform where we can discuss these challenges, and I would emphasize also look at opportunities in protecting our common cultural heritage, explore synergies between efforts, including standard setting instruments, awareness raising, and development of a conducive policy environment for the sector. With our heritage clearly being at risk, it is important to establish safeguarding and mitigation measures to manage these threats. Moreover, there's a need to forge a lasting collaboration with communities to strengthen the implementation of the preservation and the promotion efforts. And this calls for a special focus on youth and women, indigenous communities, and civil society organizations to ensure the sustainability of these conservation efforts. I would say, and having seen this work from my personal experience, let us create win-win situations where heritage sites continue to be of universal value to mankind, on the one hand, that's the convention, while generating benefits, jobs, income, and livelihood opportunities, especially for the surrounding local communities, on the other hand. So that would be the challenge, and you need to look at that side by side. Now, in seeking solutions to various challenges that I listed earlier, we see excellent opportunities in the vibrant digital technology and innovation space as well, with more focus on engaging youth in long-term heritage conservation, preservation, and promotion efforts. In addition, developing sustainable tourism strategies, which are built on eco and cultural tourism approaches and engaging the creative industry. This has the potential to contribute to the long-term safeguarding of heritage, which is at the heart of the convention. And this can be done by positively impacting the social fabric and the economic situation of local communities. Through the exchanges planned for today, sharing also case studies and best practice from various sites across the continent, I really look forward to receiving practical recommendations from this meeting that will help to harness our cultural heritage for sustainable economic development, improving livelihoods, and transforming lives. In closing, I would like to acknowledge and greatly appreciate the partnership with the Rising from the Depths network. It's really good to work with you and with all the partners and participants that have come together on this very issue of marine cultural heritage and World Heritage Sites in East Africa. I wish you most fruitful discussions, and I thank you for your attention. Asante sana, and over to you, MC.
Thank you very much, Professor Jitsent. And now I pass the floor to Dr. John Henderson, Global Chancellor Fellow at the University of Edinburgh and Principal Investigator of the Rising from the Depths Network. John, the floor is yours.
I'll just get my presentation up. Can you all see that?
We can see your presentation, yes.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Arturo, for introducing me there. I'm not a global chancellor. I wish I was. That would be quite cool. I'm a fellow in global challenges at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the PI of the Rising for the Depths network, which involves over 80 different partners. And we're currently funding, most of them coming to the end now, 27 projects throughout Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique and Madagascar, all of which are looking at how we can use marine cultural heritage to create some level of sustainable social, economic and cultural benefits. And following the excellent introduction by UNESCO Regional Director there, I was asking for some practical recommendations. And that's the phase we're now at in this project. The 27 projects that we've been funding, as I say, are coming to an end now. We're beginning to gather the data from them to start producing policy recommendations, practical on-the-ground toolkit stuff that we can do to actually start to harness some of the potential of marine cultural heritage in the region. And as was also outlined, that's very much needed at the moment because cultural heritage, particularly in East Africa, but globally in coastal areas, is under threat. And it's under threat mainly from infrastructural development, plans for super ports throughout the world by many of the main actors in the world, Russia, the UK, China, but also as part of the development plans for Kenya, Mozambique, Tanzania, the idea of becoming maritime gateways and producing large infrastructure to support that, including the construction of super ports, resource extraction, and you couple that with the dangers and the problems presented by coastal erosion and climate change, which unfortunately we're seeing only now as well. And today in Mozambique, Ricardo Duarte, who will be talking later, was talking about the effects of a cyclone hitting Mozambique. You know, again, this is happening again and again. Major storm events are becoming more and more frequent as a result of climate change. And that's a threat to heritage. It's also a threat to ways of life. So just worth putting up what the Rising from the Depths ethos is in terms of looking at marine cultural heritage. And it's a very wide definition, which includes underwater cultural heritage, such as submerged marine sites, but also coastal settlements, tangible remains, ports, buildings, stuff that's built on the coast where humans live, but also the environmental side, the ecology, the geology, that we link nature and culture together. We do not make that division between you know, sort of tangible remains and environmental management, because really all of these zones, if we're going to sustainably manage them, involves human input. There's some level of human input there, and we need to link those two strands together. And I know that's something that will be picked up later on today, but just thought I would flag that up. So we're looking at tangible remains, also of course the cultural practices, the fishing technologies, the coastal lives that people are living across these areas at the moment, the local skills, the traditional knowledge, and how that can help inform this idea of sustainable development of these countries becoming maritime gateways, not at the expense of this knowledge and deep cultural tradition, but that has a role in moving forward. So marine cultural heritage for us is all past human action in the marine and coastal environment. And as a result, that past action has a role in informing future action, future development, future projects in these areas. Now we're talking about World Heritage Sites today, and of course they really, the World Heritage Sites encapsulate, they're like a focus, a microcosm, if you like, of a range of the problems and opportunities, as was said before, but the problems that we're seeing across this area. There are 5 main World Heritage Sites, coastal World Heritage Sites in our study area: Lamu, Fort Jesus in Kenya, Kilwa, Kisiwani, Stonetown in Tanzania, and Ilha de Mozambique, of course, in Mozambique. Now, Rising from the Depths is indirectly involved in almost all of these, but has actual direct projects in Lamu, in Kilwa, Kisiwani, and as we'll be hearing later on today, Ilha de Mozambique. And this is interesting because, as I say, these sites are world famous. They're inscribed on the World Heritage List. They're incredibly important. They're recognized as international, of international importance, and yet they are still under threat from the problems and the challenges that I laid out at the beginning, mainly development. And we see this mainly, we see a good example of this in Lamu. Lamu is widely regarded as one of the best preserved examples of Swahili settlement in East Africa. And as many of you will be aware, in 2012, construction began on a 14.5 billion superport on Lamu Island, which is set to include 32 berths, airports, railways, motorways, an oil pipeline linking Lamu to South Sudan, a lot of development in this area. And UNESCO, we're aware of these problems. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there's no doubt, you can see the quote there, can be no doubt that a project of this scale cannot help but have profound negative impacts on the heritage. And indeed, the local people themselves have protested against a lot of this work. The local response: the project has denied us our livelihood, the port will destroy our heritage. Much of this is related to traditional fishing grounds being dredged and local people being kept out of the development work itself. Again, something the Director General said at the beginning there, which was really interesting, the Regional Director said, for UNESCO said, was the idea of local people being involved in this development is absolutely vital. And that's not something that happened initially with Lamu. Despite the fact that developments like this are sold as bringing in extra GDP, an extra 2 to 3% of GDP Lamu is supposed to bring into Kenya, it's less clear how much of this profit trickles down to local communities, particularly those most at risk. So yeah. In Lamu, we have traditional fishing accounting for 75% of the local economy, and the cultural practices associated with that are crucial to the identity and the heritage of the area, and yet threatened by this development. Now, there is progress here, and there's now a recognition, I think, from the Kenyan government that local people should have a voice in these developments, and that's part of the work that we are involved in, is helping to give communities a voice and to show that heritage is not a barrier to development, but it must be included as part of it if that development is going to be sustainable. It can't just simply be ignored, and that there needs to be tangible benefits to local communities. Much of the World Heritage designations, we'll talk about this today, are obviously to do with architecture, to do with the way these sites look as monuments. We talk about them as monuments. And of course, it's the life that goes around it. We talk about intangible heritage, but it's less difficult, it's less easy, I should say, to inscribe that and to legislate to protect that. That's one of the issues we face. Equally, the Ilha de Mozambique, we'll be hearing from Ricardo Duarte today. Again, an amazing World Heritage Site. It's the architecture that's inscribed. It's the skyline, pretty much like Lamu, that it's important. But Ricardo's been doing some really important underwater work in the area around the site, and how we include that in the vision and how we look at these sites and how that brings in local communities and involvement into this World Heritage designation. And the preservation going forward of these sites is dependent on communities being involved in this process, supporting this process, and being involved in this process. So, as I say, today, that's what we're looking at and to discuss. We are, as I said at the beginning, looking at producing policies and recommendations from these meetings in the next couple of months. And again, working with our partners, UNESCO, to help bring these policies to people. and make sure that they get seen. I mean, we do all this work. It's important that people listen to us as we do it. So I think that's all I want to say today. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Let's get to the good stuff and start hearing about the projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much for all the welcoming words and all the presentation. And now, before we start the first session of the day, I would like to call all participants to open the webcams so we can take a group picture, which will look very nice in our social media and our reports eventually. When you are ready, Georgia, you'll tell us when.
Okay, so I'll do a countdown once everyone's got their cameras on. Okay, so I will take the picture in 3, 2, 1, smile. There we go, and I'll do one more for good luck. 3, 2, 1, smile. There we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. We'll be sending these pictures to all the participants later on, together with the small summary report of the presentations. So thank you very much to the Director of UNESCO Office. Thank you very much to Dr. John Henderson. We are going to start the first session of the day. Before starting, just to let all the speakers know that the presentation have to be 10 minutes. I will be very, very, very strict on the time. So before the time expires, 1 minute before or so, I will say something like 1 minute. And so you can, more or less have that into account when you to conclude your presentations. This first session, we are going to talk more generally about world heritage in East Africa and marine cultural heritage, and some aspects of tangible and cultural and biocultural landscapes, biocultural heritage approaches to its preservation itself. For that, it's my honor to present our first speaker of the day, Mr. Muhammad Juma, who is head of the African unit at the UNESCO World Heritage Center. Muhammad, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. And without further ado, I pass you the floor to talk about the UNESCO World Heritage Convention and the Regional Action Plan for Africa 2021-2022. Thank you very much. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Turo. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint setup. Maybe you can enlarge it. Now it's perfect. Now it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be short because I'm going to talk about more statutory things. And I think our meeting today is much more important to talk about details. So I know that there are colleagues, they will come with details. I see Jopela will talk about detail about the marine cultural heritage itself. So I'll just talk about statutory, and then I think this is good. So following the Director Herbert in Nairobi, what he said regarding the general vision of culture. So now we are going a little bit into detail. I'll specify more on this 1972 convention, because I know when it comes to marine culture, you have a different convention which we are dealing with. So as you know, this convention is when you say 1972 convention itself has got some articles, more than 30 articles, but some of them, they are very basic, which really kind of solidify what we are doing here. So sorry, you present me, but my work here as Africa at the desk of Africa unit is to really support all African countries to represent, to implement this convention. So of course, we are dealing today with East Africa, but as you know, we have 47 African countries which have ratified this convention. And just to tell you that all African countries, we're talking about 54, not 55, like African Union, all 54 African countries, continent have already ratified this convention. The last one was Somalia, just a year ago. So what are we doing with this 1972 convention? The convention itself, what is the basis of it? The basis of the convention, of course, is really in Article 3, which is one of the most important, of course, is to identify and what we call the property, so that in the territory, so that the property can be protected. So this is the first thing that countries are doing: identify the areas which they think that need to be protected. Those identifications, some of them they'll go to World Heritage, some of them will not go to World Heritage. And I think for this workshop today is very, very important, because most of this marine culture, definitely they've not gone to World Heritage, because we are talking maybe important cities, which are like Stonetown or Lamu, but what about others, island along, which has also been part of that networking. So Article 3 is very, very important. And then, of course, the other important thing, apart from Article 3, is Article 4, that once this property has been identified, is really the responsibility of state party to protect and conserve them. So this is very, very important. We have to understand that the responsibility still remains to the state party. So, of course, by identifying, by inscribing in the World Heritage Convention, they get status of World Heritage property. The role of protecting them, conserving them, still remain to state parties, with the solidarity, of course. And why we do this? Of course, today we are talking about sustainability, but it's just to say that since 1972, the idea was there, for the community, for the future of these communities. To do that, to implement these tools, I can say convention. The convention itself established what we call a committee. I think it's very, very important to differentiate between these two parties. We have convention and we have a committee. Committee is just it's how can I say it, is a manager, you can say, of the convention on behalf of other state party which has rectified. Very, very important. And currently we talk about convention. Normally committee, you have 21 member states, and currently you have 21 member states. In Africa, for the first time, I think we have 60 countries in general. I put also, if you put Egypt, you are going to have 7 countries. So this is very, very important, because this body is the one which is beside all issues related to conservation management and other policies. So if you develop policy, and we think this policy is very important, has to be implemented to country which has rectified it. So it's good that we represent it, of course, to the committee, and then African member state can be. And then to implement this convention, as you know, we have also advisor for this. And, those 3, one of the most important, but there are the advisor board. We have also NGOs, and we have also category 2 institute like African Old Town, which we'll talk about it later. Those other, unity which are identified. So apart from this convention, we have other documents, which is very, very important. That is the supporting this convention, what we call the operational guideline. Because convention is really like a constitution, I can say, but how do you implement them? Then you have rules, guidelines. So guideline is extremely important. That's the one which help us and tell us how to inscribe, how to manage, how to conserve, how to do those things. So you have very, very important paragraph also in the convention. They tell you how about to inscribe the list. Is 3. You have how about to do tentative list. But one important thing in this paragraph is really about reporting. That this paragraph say, how do we report? And this is where it come about this action plan. When we're doing this action plan, because it's part of reporting. But before going there, let me give you just where we are today when we come to sites in Africa. So as I say, we have 47 state parties signatory to this convention in Africa. And here in UNESCO, when we say Africa, we talk more of sub-Saharan Africa. When Jepela, when he's talking about Africa, he's talking about continent. So sub-Saharan Africa, we have 47. As I say, we have 54 with North African. So I'm responsible most for this sub-Saharan Africa. We have 98 property, and as per last year inscription, 2 of them. And then we have 15 sites which are in distant danger, and this is some of them. So, and of course, as World Heritage Center, we are the secretariat of this convention. Also give possibility of funding, the activity and resources, to the state party who are doing this implementation. As I say, one of the important things when it comes to implementing of this convention is reporting. and how do we report it? So we have a report that we are doing every 2 years to the committee. The site is reported, for example, Mozambique. This year we have a cyclone, so we report it to the state party to say what happened, what activity have we done, what action have we done, it. So this is very important. But we are also reporting after every 6 years, what we call periodic reporting, to see after in period of 6 years what has been done to that country. Are we progressing? Are we regressing? If there are any challenge, and we are doing this at a regional scale. So following this periodic reporting, we produce action plan. So this is really the relation between convention and action plan. We produce action plan, which is the action plan. Then we say, okay, for the next 6 years, this is what we'll do. So the first one was 2001, and then there was the 2011, and the last one was last year, 2021. So now we have the third periodic reporting, following the third periodic reporting exercise, we have third periodic reporting report. We have also an action plan. And this is the vision of action plan, of course, is ideas to empower and to bring these World Heritage ideas for Africa, to use them for their sustainability. You know, the action plan has got 5 objectives, because we talk about convention, or the first one, about conservation, the first one, and managing it, because this is really in the heart of the convention. But also, of course, developing capacity. This is very, very important for Africa, how to develop capacity. Communication and education is also very, very important. But and then, of course, we are talking about community, we are talking about livelihood. So also engaging community is very, very important. So these 5 objectives, they have come up with 26 actions. So we have a 26 action with these 5 actions. So in this 26 action, you know, each action, some country we may emphasize some action, some country may emphasize a different action. So when it comes to East Africa, yes, when it comes to Africa, this is the country we are dealing with in East Africa. The action talk about these 5 key things that we have to do. Of course, the representation. In East Africa, we still have a country like Comoro and Djibouti, which are very important to this project, have not been part of or have not inscribed any site. But of course, we have also Eritrea, we have Kenya. But so representativity is very, very important for East Africa. Capacity building is also very important. Management, I think that you are dealing with is extremely important for this action plan. Impact of tourism also has been earmarked as important. Infrastructure, you've talked about port, climate change, which is also under human and financial resources. So those are the action that we are going to do with those countries, which some of them, because they are part of your action, like Tanzania, of course, in Kenya, and then of course you talk about Mozambique. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this informative session. I mean, we'll be talking more later. I mean, also in my presentation, I wanted to tackle a bit the question of marine cultural heritage being inserted or understood within World Heritage, and it's something that more and more we are discussing, but it's nothing new because it's been already presented even, I mean, at the beginning in the 1990s, it was already something discussed at the Commons and all that. But anyway, we will come to that later on. Thank you for that presentation. I remind all participants also to use the chat to put all the questions and comments now. We will come back to those questions during the debate, but the speakers can already look into the chat and reply to some of the questions if they want. Thank you very much. So we pass to the next presentation by my friend and former colleague, Dr. Ulrike Grant from the UNESCO Secretariat of the UNESCO 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. She is going to be speaking about Africa and the UNESCO 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. Ulrike, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hello, welcome. So
It's a pleasure.
The screen is yours then.
Thank you so much. I will have also a little presentation so that you see some, examples of what I'm speaking of. I will actually very much contribute what Hubert Guyson from our Nairobi office and also Yuma from the World Heritage Center already said. You know what the issues are, and I think we might wish to see what we could do. That was what also Hubert already said. what can we do about better protecting underwater cultural heritage, marine cultural heritage, world heritage in the African region? What are the threats and what are we doing about it? So that is really what I will shortly talk about. I will not speak so much about the statutory context because, I mean, many of you are underwater ecologists or cultural heritage professionals. So you will want to have certainly very practical observations, and I hope to be able to give some, thoughts about those. I will nevertheless shortly mention that we have, of course, the 2001 Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage at UNESCO. It's one of the 6 conventions that we have. Just to put you a little bit into the context, there's, these international treaties that are handled by the UNESCO culture sector. The 72 Convention is on World Heritage. The 2001 Convention is on Underwater Cultural Heritage. There are also others that are also very important: intangible heritage, diversity of cultural expressions, illicit traffic. So it's quite a comprehensive, assembly of international treaties protecting cultural heritage. And it's really important, please, in your countries, push for the ratification. It's very important to join hands, to take a common approach to defend our cultural heritage. Without the ratification of these conventions, somehow we remain a toothless body, and it's very important to push forward the ratification. The 2001 Convention, I just recall, contains ethical principles, strong site protection measures, state cooperation mechanism, and reputed scientific guidelines for underwater ecology. All this convention is about underwater cultural heritage, but of course in a context also of the larger coastal heritage, nautical heritage, marine heritage, all this body of heritage that is connected to the ocean, but of course also to lakes and rivers. I want also to recall to you that we are in a very important moment, in a moment of occasions and potentials, I would say, opportunities. The last year started the UN Decade for Ocean Science, and there will also be a lot of work ongoing on the Sustainable Development Goal 14. That means on a very, very high level, presidents of states and prime ministers will come together and talk about what to do about the oceans. And water, of course, as well. So there is really an issue, everyone knows, with the protection of the oceans that are out there. And there will be a large conference in Lisbon in June, July. So that is really important. And I just want to mention that Kenya is a co-host. There will also be UN Ocean Decade actions. So a lot of activities going on to the protection of oceans. There is, of course, also a big need for joining cultural aspects into these discussions. I will later again speak about that, but just to point out that this is a very important moment that we speak. This is not only about how to join world heritage and underwater cultural heritage, it's also about how to join the two, the cultural heritage, to the larger ocean actions. And that is something that we should not lose out of sight, that we are not, existing in an empty space, but that cultural heritage is a part of a bigger something, Just to point out that there is a very rich underwater cultural heritage and nautical heritage and coastal heritage in Africa. You see here a little picture of the sea routes, and of course it's only a very, very, superficial picture, but just to give you an idea that there was a lot of sea traffic going on around this continent. The ocean covers 71% of the surface of the Earth. There is more water than there is Earth. And only 5% of the seabed was mapped 1.5 years ago. Now it's really starting up because of this an ocean decade to do work on that. And only 4% of research investment goes into ocean research. Of research investment, not of investment of the overall, of research investment. So it's really, really a tiny, tiny, tiny bit that has yet been done for searching in the oceans. And I cannot even put a number to the tiny, tiny, tiny bit that was actually given to underwater cultural heritage research. So underwater cultural heritage research, there is still a large work to be done around the coasts and the rivers of Africa, of course, and the lakes. And there is a large heritage there, and only, the research has just started. But it's a very rich heritage, and we are losing it before we even had a look at it. So I just want to add this, some pictures to what Hubert already said about the threats to underwater cultural heritage in Africa. There is a huge, large, very important heritage, and we're losing it every day. Trawling. Humans consume 50% more fish today than they did 50 years ago, and there is huge trawlers going everywhere, and put the underwater heritage sites in danger before we even knew that they were there. I give you a picture. That is a picture what this is in the Mediterranean. What a shipwreck site looks like when a trawler has gone over it. There is especially also touching almost pristine deep water sites that have been in a very good state, in a very, very short time ago. And then there come these big trawlers and basically, just go through it. There's also huge issues with mineral extraction. I give you an example. I will not stay in East Africa because I have the nice pictures here from Namibia. That is dredging going on. I mean, this is here, what you see on the picture is diamond dredging. The materials are just brought to land, searched for the diamonds and then spit back in the sea. And of course, you can imagine what happens when there is underwater cultural heritage sites on the way. One big shipwreck, the Oranienbaum shipwreck, was found in Namibia already in these kind of mining operations, but this was, found because it was a big shipwreck and it was not to be overlooked. But imagine smaller sites. Prehistoric sites, there's a lot of sites that actually, illustrate the development of humanity, of the persons that we are of our civilizations, and they are being dredged, away. There is a huge rise in industrial actions on the seabed, wind farms, dredging, mineral extraction, looking for petrol. All that affects underwater cultural heritage, and it's super urgent to figure out where the sites actually are and to protect them and take them out of these kind of interventions. So that is really, really important to do something. We saw already in John's presentation port constructions that is going on everywhere. Here you see an example from Namibia. You saw already before the example from Lamu. This is going on in Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, Nigeria, and many other places. Port constructions, and also, of course, looking for petrol. These are the huge interventions that touch, ocean floors from an industrial site as well. And unfortunately, mostly a port is constructed where an old port was. So that means that the old port, the old constructions that might be hundreds of years old, are greatly endangered. There's other issues that are more nature-made and unfortunate but happening. That is corrosion. Many of the old metal shipwrecks that are ancient metal shipwrecks that lie on the beaches are corroding, and there actually would be a fantastic, cultural space to see how people have traveled and how, areas have historically developed. And they could also, of course, be an interesting touristic attraction. So there's a corrosion ongoing and, pillage ongoing and things being dragged apart. Coastal erosion has been mentioned. I'm just listing this. I mean, we had already heard this before, but I mean, just listing this again to come back to the question of who do we actually have to talk to? Because not everything is in the hand of a cultural heritage manager. And that is maybe where UNESCO can bring you some solutions and that you might want to discuss in the rest of the workshop. Of what actually to be done, and not only to say, oh, that's also sad, but rather to say, what can we do? Here's also the question of pillaging. I give you examples. Hubert already mentioned that is in Mozambique. Ricardo will feel very strongly about this very unfortunate picture.
1 minute.
Yes, 1 minute. Oh, okay. So just to say that these are the issues. We have around the 2001 convention, 71 state parties, 17 NGOs, 30 universities, 3 chairs, 1 center. So that is quite a power of underwater archaeology actors. UNESCO has organized national and regional trainings in Madagascar, Kenya, Mozambique, Turkey. There's another one upcoming in Kenya and Mombasa. So we just can encourage you to please take part. We provide free manuals, and we have also a UNESCO chair in Alexandria in Egypt. So there is quite a lot of power there to work together. There have also been 11 regional meetings to strengthen the international cooperation and bring better laws about to obtain the ratification of the 2001 convention. There's 14 states that have already ratified. You have help in inventory establishment. There's an inventory sheet from UNESCO. You have also legal drafting assistance. And we are very proud to say that we've been able to help in the very close future to the center in Mozambique that Ricardo will certainly speak more about. We have a scientific and technical advisory body that can go into the countries and look at sites that are in danger. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Madagascar case, but if I have only 1 minute, then I won't do that. But just to say that we went with an archaeologist team into Madagascar to help with threats to a pillaged site. What I want to say as a final and very important message in my presentation, and that is really important, we have done meetings with decision makers, we have done trainings with cultural heritage experts, but we have to talk much further with people much more out there that are not necessarily the first suspects to talk to. There's ocean stakeholders, there's enterprises, port constructors, petrol enterprises, climate change and biodiversity actors. That is very important to have a wider outreach. We will do this as UNESCO from the 2001 Convention on Underwater Heritage in the framework of the Ocean Decade and the Lisbon Conference. We will go to the higher UN levels to talk about the inclusion of cultural aspects. Please, you that are in government institutions, you that have partners in the different government delegations, please bring this forward. There is a zero action draft on what should be done for the oceans that isn't this moment circulating for the UN Lisbon Conference. Please talk to your stakeholders, to your partners, or yourself. Bring forward the inclusion of cultural aspects. Include your actions that you do for the oceans in the Ocean Decade, and reach out to the enterprises and to the other ocean stakeholders so that we get a much more wider conscience about cultural heritage. That's what I wanted to say, and that is really important. We will do our part. Please do your part, and we can happily discuss this further in how to step over the barriers of just the heritage community. With that, I will close. You can keep the schedule, but I'm happy to discuss this further. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. In fact, indeed, I mean, many things to talk about, and especially more about data assistance, advisory bodies of the 2001 Convention, and also the joining forces maybe with advisory bodies, also World Heritage for some issues. In that view, in that trying to join forces between different stakeholders, and that wider scope of what ocean heritage, marine heritage is, and how we need to talk more all together, not only on the physicality of heritage itself, or just focusing on the shipwrecks themselves, but all the different links with nature and people that we will see in its protection. Before I pass to the next speakers, I saw 2 questions and 2 comments on the chat, especially addressed to UNESCO. So as the former 2 speakers have been for UNESCO, Mohammed and you, Ulrike, I would like just to read it loud. I mean, there is too many, maybe. So one specifically from Professor Paul Lane from the Cambridge University and co-investigators of Rising from the Dead project. I will read it loud. I mean, these large port constructions around Africa are principally underwritten by loans from China. China has quite effective archaeological impact assessment rules and a good track record of mitigation work ahead of construction in mainland China. But this doesn't happen in Africa. What is UNESCO doing to encourage China to follow its own rules when operating outside its territorial boundaries? That's maybe a question for you both. For you, Paul Lane is on the screen, so maybe he wants to also further that comment. But Ulrike, maybe you want to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, I can just say that we really have worked a lot with China to get China to ratify the 2001 Convention. The politics are sometimes a little bit in the way of, the talks that we would like to have. But it's, of course, a very important goal of the 2001 Convention to get everyone at the table. And that's why I also say it's so important that everyone ratifies. Because staying out of the treaty makes us a little bit toothless. We cannot say you should do if there is no ratification. So I can say for the moment, we are very much pushing for ratification by China, but also by the African states, because it's also very important. And I can only draw the attention also to the fact that every country needs to take action to adapt its own laws. Because in the end, every country that ratifies the 2001 Convention that foresees mitigation measures in Article 5, should include this in the national heritage laws. And if it's not in there, then it's very difficult to waive the law and say, like, you should do. And that is not only to China, but it's also to the local states that are actually on these ports, that are hosting those ports, to improve the laws. And that's what we are actually there for. That's why we have done so many policy meetings. And we have also a model heritage law that things are, needing to be improved. We know that. It's not that we do ignore that, and we really try, but that's why I also say we have to overstep those boundaries from talking always to heritage experts, because also a local archaeologist is not always powerful enough to talk to port construction, enterprises. So that is one of the big goals that we have for this year in the framework of the UN Lisbon conference. And I also want to say that, of course, we need much more joint projects between the cultural heritage actors, like when I see Mohamed Yuma that is there for World Heritage, to have us work together, but also to work together with all the climate change and biodiversity actors. And be sure we are working on the development of these kind of projects. We had already last year been almost there, and sometimes it's not all lucky what we want to do, but we try. And the big, let's say, goal for Africa is to develop larger model projects that include cultural heritage aspects and biodiversity aspects. We try, especially for Mozambique Island, because there is, the ideal space to do such a project as a model. And we have already worked with Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission that is very much aware of these kind of needs and very open it. So be sure that this is work in progress.
Thank you, Ulrike. I pass the floor now to Mohammed for a short comment, and then to Paul, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add on what Ulrike says. It's very important, to have a capacity and people follow the rules. As I said, in the convention, what to say, the responsibility of conserving and managing is state party. So it's not China's responsibility to go and protect what is happening in Africa. It's African part. Fact, they have to do it. And you'll be maybe surprised, China is the first countries which supporting Africa in terms of capacity building, funding to support the African countries to do, to implement the 1972 convention. So here, I think for me, is really issue of capacity, African countries to have a capacity and African country to follow the rules that other countries they're doing. We know it's complex, it's not that straightforward. That is, when you have the rule, you implement it. There's many challenges here. But I think the idea is not only China, it's also to the Africans. What are we doing there? Okay. What are expert countries they are doing for their own territory, for their own countries? I think they are the first responsibility. Thank you,
Mohammed. Paul?
Yeah, I'm grateful to those responses. I would say, however, I think that just knocking things back and saying, well, we can't really do anything until the things are ratified, convention is ratified, it kind of is a little bit of a cop-out. You could, if you really want to, if China, as Mohammed is saying that China is ready to do this, then encourage them to put this as a condition on their loans to the African states. I appreciate it. It's complex, but you are the international body. You, if anybody, have the fora, access to the fora to make these arguments. And there's a huge amount of soft power involved in all of this work that China is, all of this money that China is pumping into Africa. And we see it not just on the coast, but we see it across the mainland, that there is minimal consideration of impact assessment. Chinese archaeologists that I've spoken to, senior Chinese archaeologists at the Shanghai Archaeology Forum, have also expressed their concern about it. So there is, if you like, an access there to trying to leverage the African states that are receiving these funds to take the protection and mitigation of damage to cultural heritage more seriously, and make it a condition of the loans that are provided. Just your thought.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Definitely. I mean, the way international aid and cooperation works, I mean, also is a debate on that. Also in Rising from the Depths, we've been having specifically with some of the way, I mean, funding is being applied at local scale and national scale, and this is something that we have to deal with further. I see there are more questions on the chat, but I'm going to pass to the next speaker. So please, I mean, we will, after the next two speakers, we will come back to these questions. And also, I mean, some of them, I mean, addressed to Muhammad and to Ulrike. I mean, they can reply already in the chat if they want. One regarding the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the links to the 2001 Convention, and the other more the local empowerment and community involvement into international standard settings. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Dr. Georgia Hawley from the University of Edinburgh. She is working with us at the Rising from the Depths project and helping analyzing all the different outcomes of the 27 projects of the network that are now finishing and coming up with interesting results in East Africa. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arturo. So yes, as Arturo said, I'm Georgia Hawley. I'm a postdoc on the project alongside Arturo. Brought in this final phase of the project primarily to disseminate the results and to co-create the series of policy briefs relevant to the regional challenges of protecting and utilising marine cultural heritage in the region. And it's really great to follow Ulrike and this discussion, actually, because it's quite relevant in the fact that we are in this pivotal moment of integrating marine cultural heritage into the greater kind of ocean sphere. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. So the connections between community, culture, and environment in the form of biocultural heritage resources and their relevance to the management of marine world heritage sites. So I will begin by briefly going over the various definitions of biocultural heritage before moving on to what we have found in the Rising from the Depths network regarding the threats, challenges, and potential uses of this resource on the East African coastline. So firstly, conceptualization. So the conceptualization of biocultural heritage is often used in literature as an alternative phrase for indigenous or local knowledge systems. For example, you can see the first one here is the International Institute for Environment and Development, who define biocultural heritage simply as the knowledge and practices of indigenous people and their biological resources. Yet, if we look at the literature over time, we are beginning to see some widening in the understanding of biocultural heritage as a resource. So you can see below that, we have a report from UNESCO's International Workshop on Links Between Biological and Cultural Diversity in 2008. Biocultural heritage is defined as living organisms or habitats whose present features are due to cultural action in time and space. Then again, we can look at this literature a decade later, and on the right, we see a much broader understanding, which is presented in the form of ecosystem, landscape, and place memories, where we see biophysical, non-human properties, organisms, ecosystems, tangible human practices, which will include things like farming, and what is called intangible living features of human knowledge, which includes aspects of kind of local knowledge systems, which are connected to local environments. And then again, we can look at the paper from just last year from the Institute of Heritage and Sustainable Human Development in the UK, which defines biocultural heritage as biodiversity, cultural heritage, and sustainable development of local communities, which of course is really, really relevant to what we're looking at. And I think the primary differences we see just briefly in this kind of conceptual evolution is the understanding of the core property of what biocultural heritage is. So where the emphasis is, being either people and their practices, the environment and the living habitats around them, or both as well. So taking all of this into account, I believe the best way to define biocultural heritage is not by necessarily one of its functions, such as local environmental knowledge, or by the results of the functions like the cultural landscapes, but by instead putting equal weight on both the biological and the cultural aspects of the definition. And we can join the kind of broad brush academic consensus, which acknowledges that biological and socio-ecological systems are in this constant dialogue and shape each other. And so we can define biocultural heritage as the long-term interactions between nature and culture, which together form the basis of socio-ecological systems. And within this, we see heritage, memory, experience, living practice, belief, landscapes, and the methods by which these functions are protected and managed, such as customary frameworks and knowledge systems. So how is biocultural heritage represented in marine world heritage sites currently? So if we look at the current marine world heritage sites, we of course see that they are separated into natural, cultural, or both natural and cultural importance. Yet if we look on the World Heritage List, we see no marine world heritage sites protected for cultural purposes alone, and only 4 sites protected for both cultural and natural importance. Now, I know just looking at the classification system may be somewhat arbitrary, as when we look at the individual management plans of the heritage sites themselves, we do see a more diverse level of protection for both natural and cultural assets on paper. But then again, in practice, this may not necessarily be the case. So although the operational guidelines, which we heard about of the World Heritage Convention earlier, has one of the most forward-thinking understandings of the overlaps between heritage and between natural and cultural heritage, a recent paper has looked into how marine world heritage sites are conceptualized in World Heritage communication strategies. And this showed that the human, biological, and socio-ecological systems of these sites are not interlinked in marine heritage management in practice or communication, which includes awareness raising and capacity building. So ultimately, this is suggesting that we are not seeing the nature culture links in management that we're talking about today that are so influential in both human and ecological stability and survival. So why is this the case? Why is this important? And what have we learned from the Rising from the Depths network so far in East Africa? So we will hear more from some of the projects directly relevant to marine world heritage sites in the second session today. So I will give a broader brush understanding now of some of the more general findings that are relevant to integrating biocultural heritage into the management of world heritage sites that we have so far learned from the network as a whole, bearing in mind we're kind of in the initial stages of looking at this from the bigger picture. So we have multiple projects which have undertaken work to understand the natural and cultural heritage of East Africa, some of which you can see on the screen here. And I'll just very briefly talk about the top 3. The first one, protecting the past, preserving the future, of which a lot of us may have heard Daria DeViti, who's the PI, discussing in some of our previous workshops. This highlighted the threats to both the natural and cultural heritage posed by the development of Lamu Port within the Lamu Old Town World Heritage Site, which we heard John talk about briefly at the start. As we heard, the development of this port is disproportionately affected affects the traditional fishing waters and cultural practices and surrounding natural environment. If we look at the project below that, protecting marine cultural heritage through biocultural community protocol in Kilifi County, of which Mercy Gaki is the principal investigator. This looked at methods by which biocultural heritage could be both protected and utilized against such threats by documenting biocultural heritage resources and management strategies for use in both the environmental and the heritage policy in the region, which is some of the key things that Ulrike was talking about as well. And then finally, the project embracing social learning in the management of ecosystem services in the Chongweni district. So this was led by Dr. Zacharias Ombe, who has also spoken in a number of our previous workshops. And this examined how to understand the extent of influence of marine cultural heritage as an ecosystem service, so within that world, and how nature and culture can be intertwined within the ecosystem services rhetoric. So when we look at these various projects together alongside multiple others in the network, there are a few key details that stand out already regarding the kind of relevance of management of marine world heritage sites. So firstly, most projects have shown that the threat to biocultural heritage as a key resource for both human and ecological stability is vast. So we're aware that over 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coast, and in East Africa, higher than average rates of sea level rise, coastal erosion, storm frequency, as we were hearing from Ricardo just earlier, is coupled with increased development pressures and continued migration towards the coast. So there is a clear socio-ecological crisis by which both natural and human pressures on the environment are causing damage to both ecological and population diversity. So how communities understand, monitor, and utilize the natural environment, and in turn, the other way around, how the natural environment permeates local culture, practice, and memory is evolving and is being lost as part of this. So secondly, to sustainably increase the stability of local communities and their surrounding environments, these local biocultural heritage resources need to be incorporated into management strategies. Not only does this increase compliance, but it increases the long-term sustainability by incorporating community-led initiatives that are co-created with local people. And we can see this alongside some of the results of the network. A method by which this can be done is actually one of the Marine World Heritage Sites. The Rock Island Southern Lagoon Mixed Marine World Heritage Site is one of the only examples of long-term established community stewarded sites, which integrates local knowledge practices into management and practices into management. But the primary issue faced by this site is also exemplified here in the network with some of Zacharias's work in Chongweni and others, is that climate change is affecting and evolving local understandings of place.
Georgia, 1 minute.
Okay, I'll finish it up. And that this is not being properly protected within management frameworks. And similar issues we see as well has been cited with the IUCN for World Heritage Sites, suggesting connections between nature and culture within local communities are needed to provide insight into developing climate mitigation plans, which are also a really significant part of the work that's been done in the network. So finally, future work, as we see, marine resource management is increasingly shaped by the uptake of management systems like marine spatial planning, integrated coastal zone management, and it's integral that marine cultural heritage and biocultural heritage isn't left behind in this. So we see in the Western Indian Ocean, Kenya's MSP roadmap is being implemented. Mozambique has called for coordinated development of MSP and blue economy initiatives. Tanzania is building coastal marine databases as part of the spatial data and area maps. And the Nairobi Convention Secretariat is leading the development of the implementation of a coordinated regional MSP strategy. So as Ulrika was saying, this is a really pivotal moment, and there are multiple opportunities for marine cultural heritage in all of its forms to be further integrated into marine management, and particularly linking things like MPAs with World Heritage Sites. And we're hoping as part of the dissemination of this project, we'll be able to provide a number of the policy briefs which may be able to inform this future process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I've invited all the speakers to put some of the questions already. Solange Makamo is already commenting about archaeological and biocultural heritage park in Mozambique, taking into account all these approaches that we are presenting. We are seeing already with the presentations of this first session how the wider scope of heritage, including the tangible but intangible aspects, as well as living traditions, and together within the natural space is really important in order to have effective management approaches and preserving specifically those narratives that the communities want to preserve together with within the national framework themselves. Thank you very much, Georgia. I will pass to the next and last speaker of the first session of the day. It's my pleasure to welcome today to the screen to Mr. Albino Jopela, who is Head of Programs at the African World Heritage Fund. He's going to talk about African World Heritage Fund, exploring strategies to preserve marine cultural heritage and World Heritage Sites. Albino, are you over there? Are you somewhere? I can see you now. There you are. Thank you very much. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor and privilege for the Africa World Heritage Fund to be part of this strategic meeting and also share its views on this debate. So if you allow me to, oops, I hope you can see. Sorry. Okay.
Now
so okay. So the Africa World Heritage Fund has Mohamed Juma has indicated at the beginning, a Category 2 center created both by UNESCO and the Africa Union, and its primary mission is to support African state parties to not only look after its heritage sites, but also to use heritage as a catalyst to the benefit and improvement of the custodians of this heritage. Strategically, the fund looks in 5 main areas. One which hope to support, contribute for a better representation of the continent on the World Heritage List, support conservation and safeguarding of the sites, but also drawing strategies to respond to what happens when sites are listed on the World Heritage List in danger, but also looking into strategies on how communities can derive benefits from those sites. So we have 2 main issues which from the director of the regional office of UNESCO in Nairobi to the chief of the Africa unit have pointed out quite clearly there is an issue of underrepresentation of the continent, either if one looks at sub-Saharan separately or the whole continent, which remains one of the great challenge. Another challenge is also probably the greatest one, refers to the state of conservation of such sites, where we find that even when, apart from not being, let's say, well represented on the World Heritage List, then the continent is also, let's say, overrepresented on the list of the sites that are in critical states of conservation. And then those are some of the critical issues to address. So the fund then guides its policy on those micro agendas and documents, which was particularly emphasis on the Agenda 2063 and Aspiration 5, looking into the issues of cultural identity, values and ethics. And here the marine cultural heritage is also part of these priorities. So in terms of operations, the fund and structure is operation in 3 main areas, looking into upstream conservation and sustainability, and work with, let's say, 4 main partners within the World Heritage System, from the center and the advisory bodies. So when we look into how do we support marine cultural heritage, and we can look into the World Heritage sites, we can talk of what, for instance, an example of what we do at the upstream level, which is to support capacity building among state parties, trainings, workshop, expert meetings, and field projects, which relate to the development of nomination dossiers. The last workshop happened last year, actually, in Tanzania, where we're looking into different countries. We're looking in the different nomination files, and from East Africa, I would also like to highlight, for instance, the rock art that is now being looked at Lake Victoria region, but also the historic city of Gedi, now also developing its nomination dossier, and Mozambique also reigniting its plans regarding the development of Kirimbas. And if we then look into one of the strategic areas of our intervention, we look, for instance, in relation to Kirimbas, we've been now working with the authorities and some other partners on how not only to strengthen the capacity of the state parties and professionals in terms of developing the nomination, but also looking on issues of sustainability within this context of heritage development. Another critical area is, as it was mentioned, on support of conservation. And in East Africa, again, we found that the important area of not only learning, but also that have ignited quite strong debates regarding the whole, often the dilemma of how to combine conservation and development. And we have from the development of the port in Lamu to, for instance, what happens when in a shared heritage such as this, when we have developments such as the one, the dam in Ethiopia, which then has affected the Lake Turkana systems, which result in the site being put on the World Heritage list in danger. One important element for me to highlight here is that those are often not only at in terms of cooperation among state parties, but also those cases have also drawn experts in the region to put forward a position paper on World Heritage and Sustainable Development, where some specific perspectives from the African continent are actually put forward in terms of what it means to combine conservation to development in this region. So the fund also, in terms of supporting this, which is not specific to marine cultural heritage, but basically it also applies to marine cultural heritage, would look into two main funding schemes, one related to research for young professionals pursuing their academic degrees at the master's and PhDs level, and the other one more looking into the sites, working either the sites that are developing their nomination, others are now developing their tools for conservation, such as management plan, disaster risk plans, and others. The third pillar, in terms of this engagement and looking and supporting heritage in general, and here also we can apply to marine cultural heritage, looks into community development projects, but also how do we engage a critical group across the continent, which is the youth, in the activities concerning safeguarding and protection of heritage. And we have one of our flagship programs, which is the Youth Forum, which has in the past also been held in this region, for instance, in the island of Mozambique in 2018, where the youth not only gathered to discuss challenges and opportunities for their involvement in the safeguarding of World Heritage, but also pointing out directions in terms of what are their views in terms of safeguarding and promotion, and what are the uses of heritage in the different regions across the continent. And now we are now preparing to have this year's edition, which is special, as the director of the regional office in Nairobi pointed out, that this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, and therefore is a very special occasion for not only the youth, but all communities across Africa to actually engage in the celebration of the Africa World Heritage Day, the 5th of May.
Albino, 1 minute.
Often, thank you, which often culminates with the celebration of the African World Heritage Day is often associated to the Youth Forum. Now, I would like, before I end, just to mention 3 points. One, in terms of the support, one, while we can look into the different challenges and also the opportunities that marine cultural heritage offers, specifically when we look at East Africa, where we find not only World Heritage sites that are already inscribed, but also the potential of other sites, such as those other marine sites, such as Kirimbas and others, which then calls for a combination of approach and strategies, where we'll have not only the component that is often driven in terms of academia, research, and others, but also looking into what colleagues have mentioned in terms of the results of Rising from the Dead, in terms of how specific communities have also come together and contribute to the development in some of those in those contexts. And I would like once again to thank you for the invitation, and I would like to also reiterate on behalf of the Africa World Heritage Fund that will stand ready to support initiatives that aim to promote the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, which basically it does not confine only to World Heritage, but the safeguarding of all cultural and natural heritage of outstanding significance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Now we have some time for questions and debate, around probably between 15 and 20 minutes. I'm going to start by putting a question to you, Albino, specifically on that. Maybe you have mentioned it, but I'm interested in seeing how the African World Heritage Fund can help specifically those archaeological sites submerged or in the immediate link, or not in the buffer zone, but outside, but linked to World Heritage sites in the terms of the definition of their own, not the understanding the universal value, but their own history. I mean, we see sites like in Lamu, for instance, Stonetown, or Kilwa, in which in the description dossier, we don't have any maritime cultural heritage per se inscribed, not even in the buffer zone, even if we know that it is full of different structures and shipwrecks. And that has to do with capacities in the country at the time, inventories and identification of cultural heritage assets, I guess. But for instance, if a country would like to apply to the World Heritage Fund in terms of preserving and creating capacities specifically to protect and preserve underwater marine cultural heritage that is not inscribed in a site, but is directly, historically, and archaeologically linked to its constitution. Would that be possible? Is the programs there? Thank you.
Yes, so we have, as I mentioned, apart from the conservation scheme, which basically englobes can include a wide range of projects. So in this case, we can talk of a World Heritage property, which at the time of inscription did not include certain elements. So in this case, the marine cultural heritage, the underwater component might sort of be new. So all the work that would be required, which in this case would be, for instance, to map and to come with a conservation strategy for that, those elements which might be either in the buffer zone or in the revised boundaries of the property. That will certainly be possible because, for instance, not only in this region, but in many other sites, coastal sites, that came to be the realization that one has to expand the boundaries in terms of what is considered a site, and that expansion would include, for instance, the underwater heritage. So that is perfectly possible. We can also look into, depending on the nature of projects. For instance, you might have, as I mentioned, postgraduate students who have a research project or a project on heritage conservation in relation to those elements of marine cultural heritage, which could also apply for those schemes. So depending on the nature of the project, one can always sort of like direct, and we have different cycles which call for applications which come public around beginning of May.
Thank you very much.
To kind of add to Arturo's question there, and I somewhat mentioned it in the chat, but alongside kind of expanding the boundaries, especially in terms of marine heritage sites or coastal marine heritage sites, what is the potential of using things like marine spatial planning or marine protected areas to expand these boundaries and to increase the protection and to kind of connect with World Heritage sites?
I think that there is a great potential. I think one of the challenges remain in terms of how the countries work, how the different entities within a single country they work. For instance, you take Robben Island in South Africa, where there's now being a move to actually expand the boundaries of the site and actually even integrate it under the national parks because of the marine component. But in many countries, the experience is that, for instance, if the focal point for World Heritage Convention is the Minister of Culture, then the Minister of Culture deals only with the cultural aspect. So to find that conversation across, let's say, the Parks Authority and the natural professional is often a bit of a challenge. And that, for instance, you'll find that in certain countries where the focal point is also the Ministry of Natural Resources, then you will not find that sort of a true integrated sort of approach to heritage, and that is often a challenge. However, in terms of practice, in our view, the World Heritage offers that platform where one can expand into the other areas in order to actually bring have a more holistic and sustainable approach to the conservation of such sites.
No, absolutely. I think that you find that everywhere. I mean, absolutely. In the UK, there's a huge lack of integration as well. And it's constantly for the reasons that you're saying. But I do agree that the World Heritage Convention is the platform by which to do that, because of the, the operational guidelines being so open between talking about natural heritage and cultural heritage. And I guess it's just communicating that and sharing that globally is the important thing.
Thank you. Yeah, especially besides with all the concept of cultural landscapes that was inserted in the operational guidelines, I believe, many sites are these mixed sites that would benefit definitely from this type of management, to have much more wider marine protected areas. And indeed, there are some well-rated sites in other parts, in other regions that are looking into that, I believe. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that were put in the chat earlier, like the one done by Dr. Hallie Roberts, also member of Rising from the Depths Network, to Rike. I will read it for Rike. Given the human intervention focus on the 2001 Convention, to what extent do you think it can be used to protect underwater cultural heritage against climate impacts? And secondly, is there any engagement between the 2001 Convention and the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change system? Could there be more? Ulrike, are you here to?
I'm here. No worries.
Perfect.
Yes, I had already put some small remarks on the chat, and in order to not let the questions unanswered. First, to say that, of course, the whole UN system feeds into work on SDG 13, that is a Sustainable Development Goal on climate change. So we are all working together. There is an UN Ocean agency mechanism, cooperation mechanism. So we are cooperating. Certainly, we can always do better. That is clear. And I think at the bottom line, one has to say there has to be much more research to be done on climate change and underwater cultural heritage. One issue is, of course, that one has to say and to communicate much stronger that climate change is not just something that is happening in the future, but something that happened also in the past. So we have been at the famous COP conferences to speak about that, because, I mean, climate change, everyone here, I suppose, knows it, is something that has happened over the millennia, and there's loads of underwater cultural heritage sites that were previously land sites. When one looks at all those sites like the Persian Gulf, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the channel between England and France, all these sites, and many sites, of course, also on the coast of Africa. So certainly we should do more. And I mean, we will do more, that is clear, but I can also encourage only the academic community to do more research work on these kind of issues. Climate change, of course, also affects a lot current sites in what regards coastal erosion. That is also, very much affecting sites. We can only, from our part, do the capacity building, the policy work, and trying to get this into the laws and the national laws. Something that is really needing to take action in the future. And yes, one can always do more. So that's a clear answer. One has to do more about these issues. Second question was about the communities. Yes, we put a very strong focus. We have put a very strong focus and will put a strong focus in community involvement. I just come back from a project in Guatemala where our scientific advisory body has really set up a model project. Of course, it's Latin America, but I mean, that's, one cannot be everywhere at the same moment. And that was about including the indigenous population in, consulting them about what should actually happen to the underwater heritage sites. This is something that has to be, become some kind of reflex for everyone who works on underwater cultural heritage sites to think about and think of it to include the local communities. we have several of those projects that, of course, at the UNESCO level are model projects and are, included in our capacity building, but that is something that has to become standard. To always talk to the local communities, because it's in the end, it's their heritage, and if they don't care, then who should care, So that's very important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ulrike. Albino, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add a piece on the issue of climate, which has been quite, regardless of its critical importance, is one of the areas, at least within the heritage field, that has been also posing a great challenge in terms of how do we understand the impact of climate change, for instance, on World Heritage. And to one of the initiatives that we have partnered with, which is the Climate Heritage Network, which we are part, which we had then piloted a project on the Climate Vulnerability Index, where we actually look into how to understand and to measure and to understand the impact of climate. And a pilot project was actually conducted in Kilwa, Kisiwani, which has also presented now quite interesting results in terms of methodology to help state parties also understand at least the impact of climate change. And I thought it might be also of interest for some of colleagues to also look that up. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed, very interesting. I see also in the chat there is some interesting discussion, specifically that was opened by Paul Lane before, about trying to make countries and companies that are working in other places through different development projects accountable for the preservation of heritage, and there was also discussion on how UNESCO may or not may be able to do this, or how are the methodologies on that. I mean, obviously, I mean, UNESCO works more with states and governments as well as communities, but eventually, I mean, you have to go through the governments. And there was some comments saying specifically about looking for the best ways in which we can help the governments at national level in order to make comply with regulations instead, regarding heritage impact assessments, etc. Maybe Muhammad, you want to mention something? I see you made a comment disagreeing with some of the critics that were earlier in the chat.
Yes, I just wanted to say that it's unfair to say that UNESCO cannot say to China, cannot say to having the idea that is powerful. And no, I think all countries to the convention, they're equal. They have the same boat, and we are following our rule and procedure when countries have issues to address them and to talk with them. Now, as I say, what the convention said, the responsibility of conserving and measuring either state part, either country. So you cannot tell China to do something what happened in Tanzania, though there's China companies doing there, but that's the first responsibility, has to go to the country of Tanzania. But we all agree, yes, and this is, as you say, is a complexity. There may be a China company, there may be a loan from China. Those are the other complexities which are coming in. So how do we do now to discuss with this country? And here we talk about intergovernmental system, and there are mechanisms which work in this. And for example, in 1972 convention, we have a mechanism which we call go-zone mechanism, where countries or big industry related to oil, they sign an agreement. They say that if the place you have a World Heritage Site, they will not go there and do exploration, or if they're going to do exploration, they take due diligence to make sure that they're not impacted the site. So you have those kind of intergovernmental mechanisms which we put in place. So my kind of argument was that no, it's not UNESCO cannot do something to China. No, there is intergovernmental system here, which we all countries are equally. But of course, we can always say something. We can always do something to come up with a mechanism where to support those weak countries. When a weak inside that the country doesn't have capacity or capability to due diligence when it comes to EIA and heritage impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is also a question of capacity building, strengthening relations and cooperation between different stakeholders to also, make different companies aware and be much more sensitive, and also maybe, before the national laws request that to the companies, that they are aware, not that they are impacting people's and their own heritage and histories. Any other question? You can raise your hands, put it in the chat, or just speak loud. No, maybe you, Ichumbaki, Dr. Ichumbaki, maybe you want to say something to those comments? No, we have Felipe Elage.
Yeah, thanks very much, Arturo.
I have Ichumbaki first and then Felipe. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I thank Mohammed for the response. My reaction there actually wasn't saying UNESCO isn't doing something, but what I was saying is like the local capacity in the respective countries are not quite good enough to intervene wherever Chinese projects are taking place. And even if there was some mechanisms so far from the local authorities and UNESCO to tell China that this is something which needs to be done, as it is being done in China, then that would be extremely important. So it's a call to all of the stakeholders in countries within which the projects are taking place, from the academics, but also from the UN agencies, to tell China and tell the other stakeholders and developmental partners that there is something here which needs to be done, and it is to be done now instead of waiting rather than later. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And last, I'm going to give the floor to Felipe Elage, that raised his hand before.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
we don't see you though.
Yeah. My camera is not nice.
That's okay. That's okay.
My question is to the African World Heritage Fund, Dr. Jopela, who made a very informative presentation. I know that the African World Heritage Fund is doing a great job on the capacity building of professionals and the projects to site conservation. But I would like to know more about the engagement of local community. If you have some initiatives or intervention on that point, or it's a matter only to the state parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. I think it's this question might be somehow related to the point that is also being discussed about the role of other countries, for instance, the funding. Because in terms of mandate, we found that the convention is very specific of being so-called a state party convention. So the business are often sort of treated as that government representatives. And we know that the views of often governments are not always aligned with the views of the different constituencies. So here you always have a challenge, for instance, in terms of the projects that can go, let's say, a specific nomination. Recently, we just had, for instance, Zambia was working on a nomination of a Baruti cultural landscape, and some part of the community then came forward and say, no, there are issues to be resolved. So the nomination didn't actually go ahead. And you find a sort of what we call the politics in all the process. And I think there is also a considerable role in terms of how much politics have played in the situations that we have a huge development, such as the Lamu port, but also the dam construction in Ethiopia that then affects Kenya. So from the AWHF point of view, with its role of supporting, it always makes a bit tricky to go beyond what one can do in terms of supporting, because basically the primary role then relies on the state parties, and then we support the state parties. So one might try to target, for instance, when it comes to capacity building, you target communities and direct constituencies, but ultimately the beneficiary of our work is the state party, who is the one who ratifies the convention under which we operate, which also poses quite a number of challenges.
Thank you very much. That creates, obviously, always very internal contestations and cooperations depending on the state party itself, not depending on how the state party incorporates different realities, different cultures, regional, locals, with different languages and different traditions and different ways of understanding heritage. We will try to discuss more about that later. But now, before going to the break, because we really need to go to the small break and then go to the next session, I will give the floor to Solange Macamo from Mozambique. Solange, be very brief in your comment, please, and we go to the break. Thank you. I think you are muted, Solange.
Sorry, I wanted to make a general comments. And
we see only your now. Perfect. Yeah.
I wanted to make general comments, but first a question before I forgot it to Dr. Jopela. What is the today's topic for this year, 5 of May celebrations? Because we are drafting now the project. Before I forget, I wanted to know what is the topic, because I went to the internet and I did not find it. It is important for us. So in general, I think I wanted to make my point again of the need of connecting the two conventions, implementing the two conventions along with the Biocultural Heritage Project by Uppsala University and the Rising from the Depths. Because, for instance, I know how Ulrich has been struggling and supporting many countries like Mozambique to support the 2000 and UNESCO 2001 convention. But it's, from my experience in the government, people need to know exactly how we want to use this heritage and how they can benefit, and in particular for development. So if we could continue to implement the projects that resulted from the Rising from the Depths, and I think we could have a very good position. We could be in a very good position to support the signing of this convention, because otherwise it will be a struggle that will never finish. My experience shows that we need to indicate something more useful for the people, not just saying we wanted to preserve, to protect, because people really, it was very difficult for me in the ministry to convince sometimes people. But after the Rising from the Depths, I said, oh, if I knew about that before, maybe I could have more chances to convince and do things more quickly. I also wanted to support Professor Paul Lane, what he commented, because we have these problems with the Chinese initiatives in building. They are doing a lot of development, but it is difficult to convince them, for example, when it comes to protecting archaeology and doing rescue archaeology. It seems like they don't really understand what we are talking about. But we know that in their country, in China, they have this, and that they are protecting their heritage. But when they come in Africa, and in particular here in Mozambique, they don't care about this. It seems like they never heard about archaeology or something like that. And another point is that I think universities have a lot to do. Just leave them and give them opportunity and show the results of the work, especially involving students. The students can really be very helpful. Just to give an example, with the 5th of May celebrations, we are now bringing students doing a lot of classifying monuments for the government. So I think it is the way we can really better do the things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solange. Just to keep the time, I'm trying to go into the second session. I will ask Dr. Jopela if you can reply to Solange through the chat, or maybe later we have some time because we need really to pass to the next, so we can hear also the practical cases in the second session. So I'm gonna Yes, we are gonna go just for 5 minutes breaks, not 10, 5 minutes breaks, and we will be back here around 10 to the next hour, whatever it is. So in 5 minutes from now on, okay? Thank you very much to all the speakers from the first session, and I see you all in 5 minutes. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon. Certainly from the people in Eastern Africa would be saying good afternoon now. And perhaps everybody actually in this call will be more in the afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Judy Ogana. I'm with the Regional Office for East Africa UNESCO, and I will be taking you through and moderating the second session of this convening. And I think this is an interesting session because really we're going to be looking at case studies. And what case studies do is that they give us really practical and very relatable systems and processes that different experts have gone through in the work of preserving and promoting marine heritage and cultural heritage, whether it is world heritage or underwater cultural heritage. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, and that is Dr. Arturo Rey de Silva, and he is an honor Frost Scholar in Marine Cultural Heritage at the University of Edinburgh and a member of the ICOMOS International Scientific Committee for Underwater Cultural Heritage. And Dr. Arturo will be speaking on marine cultural heritage preservation in Eastern Africa, a policy analysis. So without much further ado, Arturo, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Judith. I hope you can see my screen and hear me well.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to be very brief since many people we prefer to hear the most interesting case studies that will come after. One of the tasks and I'm doing here in the Rising from the Desk projects in the research is specifically looking into the different policies, legal aspects and policies practices in the different countries of the Rising from the Dead networks. These are Kenya, Madagascar, Tanzania, and Mozambique. So for that, I'm going to be using, as John Henderson introduced at the beginning, that concept, that wider concept of marine cultural heritage as all this human interaction or past human interaction with the marine environment, with the tangible and intangible aspects. And but in this presentation, I want to focus specifically more on the tangible aspects of it. And therefore, I'm going to be looking specifically to some of the laws in a comparative way that are dealing with the cultural heritage protection in those countries. For another presentation and for another research, we'll have to deal with environmental acts and environmental laws that more and more the revisions are incorporating some cultural heritage aspects, and then we'll have to see also all the different legislations that are linked to development itself and other aspects in the marine space with a wider view. But here I wanted to focus more on that aspects that we have in Africa. And to start with, I wanted to mention how culture is being understood first as one of the main aspirations, aspiration number 5 in the African agenda of the African Union agenda for 2063, which is also the response of the African countries to sustainable development, to the Millennium Goals first and to the Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 agenda. But it also is mentioned in the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, of which most of the African countries are signatories. Not all have ratified, and in the target region that we are talking about, only I think, Kenya is the only one who is not a signatory, and the other 3 countries are signatory of this. This Charter for African Cultural Renaissance mentions in the Article 21 and the water cultural heritage as one of the key aspects to be protected, understood, mapped, and inventoried in African countries. But at the same time, the African Union has a union model law for the protection of cultural property and heritage itself to guide member states in order to protect heritage and to modernize many of the national laws that they have regarding cultural heritage in order to include many of the visions and many of the things that we are discussing here already. Some of the aspects that we have seen when we are comparing the different laws that we have in these 4 countries are dealing with aspects of legal institutional frameworks, aspects of definition of the heritage, what heritage is understood, how heritage is defined by those legislations, and also the different conventional conservation methods that are put in place. As you can see here, many of the different legislations are adopted quite after the independence of the country. Some of them completely linked to the concepts and approaches already approved during the colonial period, in a moment in which heritage was seen by those colonial powers more as a monumentalist and physical aspect. I mean, talking about monuments, talking about aesthetic, historical, and archaeological values. These systems, as we've been discussing, they are nation-based protection systems in which it's very difficult or disregard quite a lot the inclusion of local realities and local communities. Even if there are some revision to some of these acts that we see on the screens, there are different subsidiary regulations after the adoption of this that insert, for instance, in Kenya with the amendment done to the National Museums and Heritage Sites, there was the inclusion of shipwrecks inside inside what is understood to be monuments, no? And is understood to be a shipwreck more than 50 years old, for instance. Or with the ratification of the 2001 Convention in Madagascar, when there was also the insertion of shipwrecks and underwater cultural heritage into some of the regulatory systems. We see also a difference between systems that come from British colonial frameworks and French colonial frameworks. In some of them, the British are less centralized than the French ones, although the French ones, for instance, as we see in Madagascar, the regulatory system is wider still, and we can see that can really touch different aspects of what we understand marine cultural heritage, not only the physical aspects of marine cultural heritage itself. When we look into what is defined as cultural heritage, we see that the different laws varied from wider historical and aesthetic and archaeological definitions to make list of the properties that can be considered cultural heritage. That's the case, for instance, in Mozambique, which there is a huge list of what is considered to be movable and movable properties to be protected. When the laws insert some things related to underwater cultural heritage, this is exclusive focus on shipwrecks. Shipwrecks that in most cases are linked to the European expansion itself. And there is a time limit. There's some put 50 years or 30 years, as we can see in Kenya or in the Malagasy law. That is linked somehow not only to the colonial legacies, but also in the extreme focus maybe by international or intergovernmental organizations like ICOMOS or, for instance, UNESCO, with the different standard settings focused specifically on the problem of underwater cultural heritage itself, and the beginning, focusing a lot mainly on shipwrecks itself, creating a divide between that heritage that belongs maybe to that colonial period, to the European expansion, to the heritage that is connected to the peoples of Africa themselves. So we see that this lack of people-centered or ecosystem-based approaches that we've been discussing during the morning session take us also to create a culture-nature divide and a land and sea divide, no? And we need to somehow put them together when we come to management of world heritage and cultural heritage sites. But then also we see that the main protection measures put in place according to the legislations are mainly top-down approaches with a very, very strong organizations, like for instance, National Museums of Kenya or Directorate for Antiquities, etc., that are taking in charge of all the protection of heritage that exists in the country according to the national laws and defining how the national laws is. There is also the creation of a board of trustees that normally takes the decisions of what to incorporate in those lists. Most of the protective measures put in place are specifically for immovable heritage, specifically buildings. We saw before how many of the sites that have been inscribed in the World Heritage List in East Africa, they are specifically done by the criteria as specific buildings or buildings of a specific value, a specific architectural tissue and urban tissue, instead of incorporating others. That has to do, obviously, with expertise, with capacities, with the lack of inventories and understanding, of that relation of marine cultural heritage with land heritage itself. The laws also, do protection through gazetting different sites, classifying the sites and creating boundaries that in many of the cases and up to now that is being changing during the last years, but we can see how by classifying the sites are creating fences and regulations to enter and use the sites. Many of the communities that were using the sites before see that the space where they are doing their own livelihoods, they are forbidden to get into that. They are forbidden to somehow get access to the place where they were developing their own practices, religious, sacred practices, and performing their own values and their own uses of the space itself. So it's important to see also that no conservation strategies incorporate any underwater archaeological sites. We see more recently during the last years that some management plans, for instance, for the Mozambique Island, and probably we will see it later, are incorporating more and more that underwater cultural heritage into the management plans and the strategies themselves. But it's something that is starting now when capacities are being developed, but that is not included into any of the legislation and policies that we can see. What happened when we look into the international conventions? I mean, we see that of the 4 countries, they all 4 ratified the 72 conventions, as it was said, and also the 2003 convention on safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, and the 2005 convention on the protection of the diversity of cultural expressions. That doesn't mean that they don't have the international obligation to protect underwater cultural heritage. And as we have seen, the 72 convention obliged the country to protect underwater cultural heritage. It's all the heritage that is included within the state itself. It doesn't mention underwater per se, it doesn't mention marine cultural heritage, but in Articles 4 or 5 of the 72 Convention is very clear that covers all the heritage that is within the nation itself. And the same for the 2003 and 2005 Convention. So we have to consider marine cultural heritage in the wider concept. It is within the World Heritage Convention. It is within Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention as well. Yes, they are covered by those conventions as well. And one example, for instance, for the 2003 Convention, Intangible Convention, is that there are more than 15 traditional practices regarding traditional nautical knowledge on fishing, on boat construction in different parts of the world that have been inscribed in the Intangible World Heritage Register as practices to protect themselves. So none of them come from East Africa, and we see how a lot of these nautical traditions, this traditional knowledge that the communities are passing from generation to generation, are disappearing completely with the development projects that we are seeing in Africa. And the water cultural heritage, they've been considerations, and already, I mean, Ulrike Grant already introduced some of this wider scope that the convention is having in linking programs and synergies with other programs. But already the debate on inserting underwater cultural heritage in world heritage started already at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, within ICOMOS and the creation of the International Scientific Committee for Underwater Cultural Heritage. Well, we won't go into that. But this was already mentioned. I mean, some of the sites that in which Rising from the Depths is working they are directly linked to World Heritage sites, and we can see how all these maritime aspects are suffering for different development projects, and that's because they are in link in terms of the management and these inscription dossiers, no? Because these inscription dossiers are based mainly on the immovable features of the sites, normally old city centers, old towns, as for instance, Lamu or Stonetown, without linking it to the sea. We will see in the next presentations things related to that. And that despite the rich maritime components that are recognized by all the different experts and all the research that are being done. And that is being highlighted. That takes us to somehow think about this African World Heritage Action Plan that will need to have a major representativity. We see how World Heritage in Africa is lacking that major representativeness and major balance in terms of different type of sites. And I think marine cultural heritage can probably increment and create another value to the outstanding universal value of many of World Heritage sites, and lack, you know, all the we see all the different points of that action plan that may improve also the protection of marine cultural heritage. Just to finish now in the next couple of minutes, some of the main findings.
1 minute. Sorry.
1 minute. So in the next minute, you see some of the main findings that we see comparing not only these laws, but the other different laws like environmental acts and national policy adaptation, national plans adaptations, and different sustainable development visions for the future and strategies, we see that one of the main problems that we have is also the lack of incorporating those ecosystem-based links. No? That's why some of the aspects have to be with nature, as current legislation don't cover the preservation of marine cultural heritage in terms of linking people within an environment and their own culture. At the same time, communities are not involved and are even discouraged to be involved according to the present laws in most of the countries. So there exists a contestation between what is understood to be the authorized experts to enter and to practice on those sites and the decision makers, and those who are considered to be the heritage users and the heritage producers, who are the community themselves. No? So there is a problem of contestation there. There is a problem of definition of heritage, as we have seen, a problem that we need to tackle on inventories, that's also linked to the capacities. We need to map as fast as possible now all marine cultural heritage together with the communities, with those who are practicing that heritage and enjoying that space where the underwater archaeological heritage is also found before it's disappearing with the rapid development that we have. Also, another of the items that we're seeing is the traditional regulatory systems in Africa, as it's been pointed out many times by different experts. I mean, we have Ndoro and Chirikure and Paul Lane, also Colin Breen also talking about these aspects as well. I mean, the importance of mixing up best regulatory systems, best knowledge that we have in the communities, in the countries themselves, with those national regulatory systems. They have to be incorporated and taken into account. Communities and the law that they have created orally, mainly, that is not written and is not spoken and is linked to different type of values and sacred beliefs, they need to be incorporated to national systems. Then other of the issues, there's impact assessments. I'm not going to go into more details into all that. The international conventions, we need to not only implement and ratify conventions like the 2001 convention, but also push to implement the other conventions they have already. Because the conventions, as I said, World Heritage Convention or the 2003 Convention on Intangible Heritage, they do cover marine cultural heritage in different aspects. And the same for research agendas. We see how the integration of multi-narrative approaches and traditional heritage practices through in the priorities to research in the different places that we are working on can really change not only the way we do archaeology, the way we approach heritage practice, but also the way, the community is being involved and benefiting from it. Just to finish, this ecosystem-based view, this view of marine cultural landscapes that we wanted to push here, linking people with nature and heritage, will take us also to talk about the values of heritage, how people feel, use, and understand that heritage. And that will take us, it has to be integrated into the legislation that will create a framework for a much more inclusive and participatory heritage practice that at the end will take us to talk about sustainable development and well-being of the people themselves. Once the people, they see in the heritage that is a value for them to benefit and to continue progressing in their lives and enjoying some sort of development in a sustainable way. With that, I finish, and I hope we can have some time later to discuss. Thank you very much. Thank you, Judith. Sorry for the time if I pass.
No, thank you very much, Turo. Yes, I think that it's very rich having to have that kind of presentation in 10 minutes. So I'm sorry to have rushed you, but yes, we need to try and manage the time. So as you've said, we'll keep all the questions at the end, and probably hope to have a discussion session after all the presentations have been made. But please, you can put your comments and questions online so that we can be able to proceed with that. So next on to make a presentation is Mr. Wycliffe Omondi. He is a PhD researcher with the University of Edinburgh and project investigator from Rising from the Depths and heritage professional at the National Museums of Kenya. He will be speaking on coastal cultural heritage conservation and sustainable development on classified sites in Kenya. And I hope that Mr. Wycliffe, you will keep it to 10 minutes. Karibu sana, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Hi. Are you able to see my PowerPoint presentation?
We can't see your presentation yet.
Okay, just a minute. Just a minute. To share it. Is it visible?
Not yet on my side, but maybe somebody else can see it.
Oh, we don't see the presentation.
Just a minute.
Judith, maybe I can suggest, I mean, Wycliffe, if you want, you can send me your presentation and we can put it from here. But in the meantime, we can pass to the next speaker.
I've already sent to your inbox.
Okay. You sent it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, so you sent it to me. I mean, I can put
yes.
it from. Just give me a sec.
Okay.
I have his presentation here, so we can put it.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen now for you, Wycliffe. Okay.
Okay, it's coming up now. Great. So Wycliffe, the floor is yours. Karibu sana. Hello, Wycliffe. Wycliffe, you can proceed. The presentation now is visible on our side, so you can proceed.
Okay.
Welcome. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arturo and Judy. You can move to the next. My presentation is basically this is the overview of the presentation, and I'm going to discuss in brief the cultural heritage conservation in addition to classified or listed World Heritage Sites in Kenya. And specifically, I'm going to discuss more on Lamu Old Town. That is the outline of my presentation, as you can see. Next. What is most important is that the coastal fringe of Kenya is where we have many listed sites. These are sites that are gazetted under National Heritage Act of Kenya. And what's most important is that it's within the coastal region that we have the highest recorded numbers of gazetted monuments. And what is most interesting is that it's still along the coastal sides of Kenya that we have severe poverty levels. This has been documented by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Some of these sites have eventually been converted to site museums, and these are managed and run by National Museums of Kenya. Next. You'll find that notwithstanding the gazettement, what's most important is that most of these sites that have not been gazetted lack proper legislation. But very interesting is that of late, there's been a major focus on development. These are mostly infrastructure development. And this development are geared towards eradication of poverty. As I said before, along the coastal fringes of Kenya is where we have higher poverty levels. This infrastructure development have brought antagonistic relationship between marine cultural heritage and sustainable development along the coast of Kenya. Marine cultural heritage has been defined by John Anderson. What's most important is that it is a combination of the seascapes and the landscapes and how these interact in relation to sustainable development. In Kenya, you'll find that ports and road networks have been given much priority. And the government of Kenya assumes that with the construction of major roads and ports, this is going to create pathways to empower community members in various places across the country. So the main purpose of this presentation is to explore the relationship between marine cultural heritage conservation and sustainable development along the coast of Kenya. And I will emphasize more on public participation and the place of the local community members when it comes to heritage conservation. Next. In Kenya, Kenya is a signatory to a number of conventions. That's the 1972 convention, the 2003 convention, and also the 2005 convention. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus more on the first convention, that's the 1972 convention, but also find out that aspect relating to the 2003 convention and also the 2000 convention kind of interrelate when it comes to management of cultural and natural heritage sites. Next, please. So far in Kenya, we have a total of 7 sites which have been listed in the UNESCO World Heritage List. And as you can see, we have 4 which are cultural heritage sites, while we have 3 as natural heritage sites. What's most important is that all these sites, if you look at the cultural heritage sites, you realize that 3 out of 4 are close to large water bodies. The ones listed as cultural sites, you find that Lamu Old Town, the Sacred Mijikenda Kayas, and Fort Jesus, they border the Indian Ocean. When it comes to natural heritage sites, you find that Lake Turkana and the Kenya lake systems, these are directly related to water bodies. Lake Turkana, as has been mentioned earlier on, is also being impacted with the Ethiopian dams that are under construction. Next, please. So far, the 1972 convention, you realize that we have over 42 conservation reports. This is a big milestone. Also, Kenya has received international assistance 16 times. And so far, Kenya has been able to get over $307,000 US towards from the International Assistance Fund. Next, please. Next. This is one of the. These are some of the listed World Heritage sites. That is Timi Choinga. The next one is the Mijikenda Sacred Sites. Next, we have Fort Jesus. Next, please. Lamu Old Town. Next. So what's most important is that of late, the government of Kenya has come up with a number of mega projects. And these mega projects, the ones that I've listed, are found or touch some of the sites along the coast of Kenya. One of the flagship projects is the LAPSET, as is referred. I'll find that this project is worth $29 billion US. We have the Kenya-Tanzania highway that runs from Malindi, that's the northern part of Kenya, along the coast, all the way to Bagamoyo in Tanzania. We have the Mombasa port expansion, the Dongukulu bypass, that's both phase 1 and phase 2. And also we have proposed development along Shimoni. This is the southern part of Kenya. These are some of the flagship projects that has been earmarked by the Kenyan government. These projects are in different phases, but I'll focus more on the first flagship project. That is the LAPSET. Next. The LabSet project has a number of components ranging from 32 deep sea berths at Manda. We have a standard gauge rail line which has been proposed to run all the way from Lamu to Juba and Addis Ababa, that is in southern Sudan and Ethiopia. Also, we have oil pipelines which have been earmarked to run parallel to this road network all the way to Lamu port. Also, Kenya government proposes to develop 3 resort cities, that is in Lamu, Isiolo, and Turkana shores. What is very interesting is that in line with this project, the government had proposed to develop a coal plant, the Lamu Coal Plant Project, a power station, and this was initially earmarked to be developed in Pate Island before it was moved to the mainland. All these projects are related to the Vision 2030, the economic pillar of in transforming Kenya. The purpose of transforming Kenya is to ensure that Kenya gets industrialized and we are able to be a middle income country. Also, the Vision 2030 emphasizes that life, the high quality of life is extremely important, and that every person is entitled to a clean and secure environment. But is this the case? Lamu, as you all know, as a wildlife site, was enlisted because of those 3 criterions. That is criteria 1, 2, 4, and 6. And we find that what cuts across is that Lamu Old Town is considered as the oldest and best preserved Swahili settlement in East Africa that has had this tradition continuously over the years. Next, please. Given that Lamu's position as a heritage site and vis-a-vis the construction of the coal plant, the local community in Lamu, spearheaded by the Save Lamu Natural Justice and Katiba Institute, opposed the development of the coal plant. And this coal plant, for those who are aware, it was owned by a China company and also a consortium of Kenyan business personnel. So there's a lot of opposition in coming up with the coal plant in around Lamu. And the reason that's why Save Lamu Natural Justice and Katiba Institute opposed the erection of the coal plant was because they felt that it was a potential danger to their life and also to Lamu citizens. And this was considered would disrupt the town's cultural traditions. The government of Kenya disregarded what was being proposed by Save Lamu, and insisted the best they could do is to move the coal plant from one of the islands, that is Pate Island, to the mainland, that is next to Manda. But where it was being relocated to is less than 20 kilometers from Lamu Old Town. So there was no big difference from Pate Island to the mainland. Next, please. Next slide. So Save Lamu challenged the project, and it was only after 3 years that the National Environmental Tribunal found that there was no substantial basis for the license that was issued by, that is the National Environmental Management Authority, to allow the construction of that coal plant.
Wycliffe,
With
your
that,
your time is running, so please start wrapping up.
Yes, I'll rush. So what happened is that the construction of that power plant was stopped, and pointing out that there was no clear public participation, and Amu Power Plant was asked to go back and consult and involve community members. Next, please. Next slide. So these are the rulings. It showed that no advertisement was put in the newspapers. Where the company claimed that there was public participation, people are not given enough time to raise ideas, and also to clearly state their position in relation to the power plant. So the tribunal also pointed out that the minutes were postdated to show that there was ample time to involve community members. Next, please. What this implies is that it clearly shows that community members are important whenever we come up with development project, and that it's always important to have free, prior and informed consent from community members, and this is clearly stated in the 2003 convention, UNESCO convention. Next, please. So designation of Lamu Old Town played a major role to ensure that this project did not take place. If it was not a World Heritage Site, I'm sure the coal plant project will have proceeded on without any interference. It's critical also to understand that creation of linkages between marine cultural heritage and World Heritage Sites is important. Also, this ruling can be pointed out to be similar to an earlier ruling by the Kenyan High Court, where the government of Kenya had violated Lamu residents' rights by not involving them in the design stage of the project. There was no clear public participation, and that's why the Kenya High Court in 2018 also stopped the LAPSET project to proceed without clear public participation. But it was appealed, and the community, though, to be compensated, about 4,000 fishermen were to be compensated. This has not taken place up to date. What is most important is that what is the site is setting surrounding is all important to ensure that the outstanding universal value is not compromised in this with development projects. And that is all for now. I've tried to rush through all this. I thought 10 minutes is quite some time.
Thank you so much, Wycliffe. Yeah, it's gone over time. Thank you very much. And so that we can be able to allow for other presenters and also a short time, we'll go straight to the next presentation by Professor Mark Horton from the Royal Agricultural University of the UK and project investigator from the Rising from the Depths. He will present, or his presentation will focus on Stonetown and the importance of marine cultural heritage in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And I see his presentation is already up, so welcome. And please keep it to 10 minutes. I think I'll try to be a little bit more strict this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. I'll do my very best. It was very alarming to see the story of Lamu. I spent most of my early archaeological career working in Lamu. And it's so sad to see all those developments, but at least there's some success maybe. But I've also been working in Zanzibar for many years, and I'm a PI of one of the Rising from the Depths project, looking at marine cultural heritage on Pemba Island, which is Zanzibar's sister island. But in this talk, I'm going to bring in some of the findings from that, as well as understanding what's going on in Stonetown more specifically, because obviously I've been working there for many years. Firstly, to make the point that Zanzibar is all about maritime coastal heritage, as illustrated by this initial drawing made in the 19th century, which shows how it's this thriving maritime coastal entrepot with small boats bringing in goods from the mainland and from Africa, mainland Africa. There's a boat there laden, for example, with tusks of ivory, the larger ships lying offshore, the hubbub underneath the walls of the fort, and the consulates, the various European consulates with their flags flying exchanging these commodities. So Zanzibar in the 19th century famously is this great world city, great world port city, living off this maritime exchange network. And to some extent, it was that world city that gained it its World Heritage status. So here are the three criteria that were attached to it in 2000. A cultural fusion and harmonization, intense seaboard trading activities between Africa and Asia, and the role that Zanzibar held in both the slave trade and in its suppression. The role in it is not made explicitly, the emphasis there is on the suppression. These are involved in maritime cultural activities, although as we've already seen today, with these criteria, none of this is really made explicit in the World Heritage designation. Perhaps because it really wasn't considered much in the 20 years ago. So what should we do? Where do we place the maritime cultural heritage? How do we take these ideas now and understand how the essentially conservation management of the Stonetown and Zanzibar and Pemba in general should be considered? A quick slide to illustrate why the place is important. It sticks out as a sand spit into the Indian Ocean, to the Zanzibar Channel, and is alternately protected from the northeast and southwest monsoons. And therefore, historically, it's an extremely good place to have a settlement because ships can be anchored in alternative positions as the monsoon changes, and the natural sand spit will protect those vessels. On the left, we have an image of the town in the mid-19th century, and the Stonetown is very much developed, as we can see even today from this Google image, really from that basis. We can see that actually, in reality, most of the buildings in the Stonetown don't really date to much earlier than the mid-19th century, and many of them are late 19th and early 20th century. It's the ambience and the setting and the sense of an ancient town that I'm sure is part of its outstanding universal value. Zanzibar itself was only called as such by the Portuguese in the 16th century, but the word Unguja, we think, derives from the Bantu word to wait, in other words, to wait for the monsoon to change. And here's in terms of intangible cultural heritage, this is the Dhow Harbour in the Stonetown, which was created by the British in 1929. Before that, the dhows literally stood off the beach. And it's quite instructive to look at how this intangible cultural heritage can change. The Zanzibar Guide of 1961 says dhows visit Zanzibar from India, Arabia, Persian Gulf and Aden and return on the southwest monsoon. And that's as really recent as the 60s and 70s. Now there's very little of such trade, and all the vessels using the Dhow Harbour tend to be local vessels, maybe small cargo dhows moving stuff around the archipelago and along the African coast. None are now coming from the earlier maritime culture heritage of Zanzibar is much more like this. Collections of the Royal Geographical Society. And we can see there's just vast numbers of boats just there at anchoring. So in the 19th century and into the 20th century, the shipping, the boats were very much integrated into the townscape of Zanzibar. And that can be seen, for example, in graffiti that are placed on the walls of buildings. For example, here we've got the example on the wall of the old fort. In terms of earlier cultural heritage, the UNESCO designation is very unclear. It mentions centuries old, but in reality, and our archaeology has shown that in fact it was a major port on the scale of Kilwa, for example, right the way back to the 11th century. Here we've got a medieval minaret and a sheikh's tomb, which is a little bit later, showing sort of the mobility of people coming into Zanzibar. But it's the old forts where that cultural heritage is best preserved. So here we've done excavations around the fort. There's a historic photograph showing all the dhows off there. And what we've been able to demonstrate is a very long cultural sequence there that goes back, goes back to the 11th century, or maybe even earlier, with deep archaeology, masses of really lovely imports from around the Indian Ocean world and around China and so forth, in deep stratified archaeology with associated buildings. So this is a Zanzibar stone, it's a Swahili stone town. Before the 19th century, stone town was there. And this is a whole new element, I think, to the understanding of the cultural heritage, maritime cultural heritage of Zanzibar, Stonetown. We've also been able to identify significant Portuguese activities, again, location of a trading factory and Portuguese mission, again, on this same location. Before the whole place is then turned into the headquarters, really, of the Busaides, as they were governing East Africa and creating a maritime empire in the 18th century. And I would just mention, I'm going to do a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to go through some of the horror stories. So here's one of the aspects of maritime cultural heritage, which is the Sultan of Zanzibar's barge, which when I photographed in 1985 was in relatively good condition. But I would think a rather ill-fated management program to restore it, was abandoned halfway through. It was then dumped in a go-down in the harbour, and there it remains. The barge itself was made in Britain, in Cowes, Isle of Wight, and I just include this as the package of documents relating to the National Archives. This is the state barge given to H.H. the Sultan of Zanzibar to console him for being protected. Lots of colonial undertones there. But to just come back to our work looking at the maritime cultural heritage and the lessons that we've learned. And first of all, we've learned that the introduction of ring netting, huge quantities of plastic rope, which have been dumped and used in the ocean, are not only clearing the oceans of their fish, but also creating major ocean plastic pollution. And what's happening is that the more traditional fishing methods are being undermined by this. And if we are going to sustain the natural environment around the archipelago, we need to also sustain traditional fishing practices, because that's the only way that the fish are going to stay in the sea, and the sea is not going to be filled with plastic. Here's a couple of quotes. We don't have time. The sea is dying. The problem is there's nothing to get from the sea. This is the sort of things that people were telling us. Now the fishing is easy, but was hard in the past. Now there are few fish. In the past, fishing was harder, but there were many fish. And this particularly relates to the Stonetown area, because the maritime, the fishing environment was an integral part of the town. And here's a 19th century vessel showing the fishing vessels and the matepes, which exploited the mangroves, all up on the beach. And that still exists today. There's a spectacular area which no one very really visits, north of the Stonetown, as it's in the buffer zone of the Stonetown. Huge numbers of ships and ship repairing going on here, fishing boats, and so forth. And you can see the boat repairing there going under the trees. But if we lose that, we're going to lose the traditional cultural heritage that goes with it in terms of traditional shipbuilding and the methods that go with it, and the whole supply chain that keeps the traditional fishing industries going, which are integrated into maritime cultural heritage that go back for many centuries. Couple of last images. This is what's being done to the shoreline north of Zanzibar, which is a large hotel complex with huge quantities of sand dredging. And in the background, I just parked that out here, is the Matoni Palace of Said bin Sultan, the place where clothes were introduced, the royal palace of the early Omani sultans in the early 19th century. Now totally dwarfed by this port construction and luxury hotel funded with money from the Gulf, creating a marina now for luxury super yachts. This was done without any concern for the setting of the Matoni Palace, or indeed the setting of the Stonetown or the traditional maritime cultural heritage. We could say a lot about seaweed, which is another area we've been looking at. And what we're finding there is that hotel development is fundamentally stopping the seaweed, because no hotel, no tourist wants to go and see seaweed farms outside their hotel.
Sorry, Mark, your time is actually gone.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
1 minute.
Hotels. This is the new Hyatt Regency in the Stonetown, which is a horrendous structure. Here's the collapsing that we're seeing in the Stonetown. This was taken 3 weeks ago of what's really going on. And I'll just finish, of course, with this iconic image of what's really happening in the Stonetown at the moment. On the left is the Beit al-Ajab, the House of Wonders. On the right, taken near the same place, the scene last year after its collapse on Christmas Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for speeding through the presentation. I really appreciate that. It's very rich, but yeah, understanding the timing and needing to move to the next presentations. Just please, everybody look at what's happening in the chat. There's quite a bit of contributions and discussion there. So please do look at the chat as we go along. Moving right along to the next presentation by Dr. Ichumbaki from the University of Dar es Salaam and a project investigator from the Rising from the Depths. Karibu sana, Daktari Ichumbaki. He will be speaking on marine cultural heritage in Kilwa, Kisiwani. Welcome. And again, I'm going to be, I'll just tell you that, yes, it's going to be 10 minutes strict, and then you'll see my face coming on the screen, which is a sign. Yeah, thank you, Karibu.
Asante sana, Judy. Thank you, everybody. I hope you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Can you see my screen? Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the marine cultural heritage in Kilwa, Kisiwani, a part of the World Heritage site along the coast of Tanzania. And Kilwa, Kisiwani, as it is the case for several other, the coast of Tanzania, there are lots of shipwreck sites, there are lots of marine cultural heritage sites, but many of these sites which have been recorded, as you can see on the map, but also on the chart, they are European kind of shipwrecks and some kind of local narratives about the importance of marine cultural heritage and the links between the people, the community's activities as far as the ocean is concerned. But for this case, I will talk about the non-European shipwrecks, which are in Kilwa, Kisiwani, which form part and parcel of the World Heritage Site. And I'll take you through some of the activities that me and my colleagues, as I showed, especially Cesar Bita from the National Museum of Kenya, Edward Porat, and Richard Bates, we have been doing in Kilwa, some of the work supported by Rising from the Depths. So we have done a lot of reviewing literature, but also talking to the people, doing some sort of intertidal coastal surveys. We have conducted some marine geophysics accompanied by diving some of the places. We are planning to do excavations, which we haven't done. So as you can see from the images on your right-hand side, we have sitting, one of the team is sitting with people, trying to interview, to collect some records, understand what is it, but we also done some surveys, as you can see on the coastal and the marine geophysics there on the boat, as far as diving is concerned. In doing these kind of activities we have talked about, especially from the local people's narratives, we have recorded a lot of information whereby the people are talking about issues related to boats, and they are making reference to this stone here, which they call Jiwe la Jahazi, the dow's stone, which resembles more or less like the Jahazi, resembles like the boat, and they explained like this is a stone which actually was a ship that the local people were being attacked by a ship from somewhere, but because of their religion, because of their prayers, this ship turned into a stone. And so the surveys that we conducted along this particular site recorded a lot of stones that we have recorded interpreted as ballasts, and this indicate at some point the shipwreck the ship did wreck there, and this number of stones might come from different places because they are volcanic, which are alien to the coast of East Africa. And these are some of the rocks you can see. They are exotic, and we think probably some might be coming from Comoro and somewhere else, but they are sandstones, basalt, granite, and some are quartzite as well. And they are within a landscape which we think is not original, but these stones might have been brought there because of the wrecking of the site. And within the same lagoon, there are lots of ceramics. These are some of the ceramics that are recorded from the causeways.
Dr. I think we've lost sound.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. Okay. So I was saying some of the ceramics we recorded, they are more or less the same as what has been recorded elsewhere, and they date between the 9th and 10th century, like those that you can see. We also did try to map some of the ballasts on Jiwera Jahazi I talked about, and you could see a number of concentration of these barracks somewhere here in between, within the middle of the lagoon, but you have the causeways on the north, on the south, which means there was a ship at some point trying to come in and probably wrecked, and it went overboard over there. And then coming to marine geophysics, we did some kind of scanning of the seabed to try to see if there could be some anomalies which we could further follow up to understand what is in there. And this is the methodology that was going on, but we had a sonar attacked on the boat, scanning the entire seabed within the Kilwa to map out. So this is what the seabed is looking like, and some of the materials which shows different. I will not talk very much into that just for the interest of time, but there are some indications which showed at some point there are some anomalies which needed further follow-up to understand what is under there. So some of the analysis of the scanning indicated such a thread which motivated the desire to follow up and do diving to see what is in there. And so a follow-up diving at the anomalies recorded different scenarios, one of which were the stone anchor and the spread of the ceramics, which are almost covering about 100 meters on the surface. And when you relate this with, in terms of location, with the main harbor in Kilwa Kisiwani, but with the gereza, and then you could see this might have been in the entrance, and because there is this spread of materials on the entrance to Kilwa Kisiwani, we made the conclusion that this is a shipwreck site, which is also confirmed by the presence of this Indochina stone anchor, as you could see on the illustrations, but also on the photo. And because there has been another stone anchor recorded on the mainland, which more or less resemble with the one we recorded on the seabed, then you saw that was a shipwreck. On the same area, there are lots of ceramics on the spread of about 100 meters, and some of which are like this one, the Chinese, sorry, the monochrome over there, but there are also another major stones which we think they are ballast, they are rotten there. On the same landscape, there are major stones and the bones. You could see these bones. We haven't made a thorough analysis of what these bones might be, but at least the ceramics that we were able to recover and analyze, you could see like this is ceramic monochrome, but we have a lot of Chinese ceramics and some of the identifiable materials that have been recorded somewhere. Because of that importance and some of the narratives with the follow-up support, we did put up a small site museum for the people to come and see and make use of what we recovered so far and some of the narratives. So this is a banner of what the museum is and how it was being created, which is now operational at Kilwa Kisiwani. And there are lots of material capture from the Kilwa Kisiwani community, which in a way or another connected to the marine life and how their interaction with the sea has been going on. And some of the materials that were recovered from the diving are now part of what is being exhibited in the museum, and people visiting Kilwa can have a look and see what is it which has been important to the site, adding value to the site, but also including some of the important marine cultural heritage to the Kilwa. So in terms of conclusion, for the benefit of time, I think I almost running short of time. I think we have been able to record at least 2 medieval shipwrecks within the Kilwa Kisiwani, and this is extremely important to extend the World Heritage Site, because when this site was being gazetted, the focus was very much on the monuments, on the archaeological materials, on the land, and some of the narratives, but there was no consideration of the maritime importance, which is critical, and probably it needs to be included and be identified as part of this important World Heritage Site. But the identification of these wrecks opens an understanding of the trade and travel around the Western Indian Ocean. And this is what we have been hearing from other talks in Zanzibar, in Kenya, and as probably as we will hear from Mozambique after me, but there is exciting sites which needs to be recorded. The basalt and the exotic rocks are good indicators of shipwreck, and therefore we think the sites that we recorded, which are along the coast of Kilwa, they are critical and they probably need further studies. And there is also an important desire that we need to record the environments from which the shipwrecks are found and the deposition processes. But it is very critical again that the coastal heritage in Kilwa and probably other parts of the Tanzanian coast and Eastern Africa in general, they are really endangered because of the developmental activities that are taking place. Like in Kilwa and further south, there was a lot of oil and gas exploration, which endangers to some extent the cultural heritage. There is therefore a need to document and inform what we find on the seabed and nearby sites. So for further details about these important sites from Kilwa, one can read this article in the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology, which is available online, and you can follow up and see what is it there. And would like really to appreciate some of the support. But for further information, you can just email me or follow us on social media where we are posting some of these important sites. Thank you very much, Jude, if I am on time. Yeah.
Daktari, you've done very well on time. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the links. I'll just ask that if you could transfer the links also to the chat so that somebody can be able to click on it and be able to access it. But thank you very much for keeping time and for actually making that very, very interesting presentation on Kilwa Kisiwani and the work you're doing there. So without further ado, I would like to invite Daktari or Dr. Ricardo Duarte. I don't know whether he's online, and if he is,
yes,
welcome. And welcome, Dr. Duarte from the University of Eduardo Mondlane in Mozambique, and the director of the Center for Maritime Archaeology at Mozambique Island. And he's also a project investigator from the Rising from the Depths Network. The presentation by Ricardo will be on Mozambique Island and its marine cultural landscape. So welcome, Dr. Ricardo. And just remember that we are completely running out of time and we'd like a few minutes of discussion. So please, I'll give you 10 minutes strict, and then we can be able to proceed to the next. Thank you very much. Welcome. Your floor is yours.
Can you share my screen?
Does anybody have, who has your presentation? Okay, Arturo. All right.
Hello?
We can see your screen. We can see Arturo's screen, and I think that is your presentation. Please go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
So underwater archaeological heritage is an important asset that more than 20 years from the setup of the UNESCO 2001 convention is still subject to the great pressure, being to highlight the threat posed by treasure hunting. Mozambique Island, a World Heritage Site, has in its surrounding waters an important underwater archaeological heritage, a diversity of wrecks, more than 20 wrecks from different origins and different periods of the Indian Ocean and world history. This heritage should be studied and protected as a fundamental component of the World Heritage Site and not be addressed in isolation. An example is the wreck of an Indian Ocean trade ship recently identified in Mozambique Island. By mid-first millennium, already an extensive commercial network extended across the Indian Ocean. This is one of humanity's oldest transoceanic trade networks that has endured in time, connecting ancient important civilizations. And underwater cultural heritage must be linked to other cultural achievements in this region, as the expressive monumental architecture of the medieval East African state towns that developed linked with the ancient Indian Ocean trade networks. This is some important ruins, medieval ruins just near Mozambique Island that are in problems of conservation. Another example is the wreck of the famous slave ship Aurora, recently identified in Mozambique Island waters. This is a very important wreck. This is the first ship that takes slaves from Africa to America. West archaeologists from slave wreck projects joined with Mozambican colleagues to study and protect the remains of the Aurora wreck. Conservation facilities and skilled professionals work in Mozambique Island for the conservation of the heritage of this important wreck, an heritage that will enrich the memory of the slave trade component of the island history, like this garden memory that evocates the slaves that have been deported from Mozambique Island. The effective protection of this heritage requires the training of competent professionals and the establishment of qualified institutions. On the island of Mozambique, we have been developing regional training for African professionals with UNESCO and United States supported SWP project. With US support, we have created KAIRIM, an institution devoted to research and training in underwater cultural heritage. Together with UNESCO and our West partners of the SWP, KAIRIM is developing training for African professionals. This is an image of a regional training course we gave in 2019. Theoretical teaching must be completed with practical experience in wrecks, and there are ideal conditions for that in Mozambique Island. In scope of the Rising from the Deep, we have in a joint project between KAIRIM and the University of Ulster conducted pioneer research in marine geophysics with very interesting results in terms of paleo-environmental reconstruction. As a component of this project, an introduction to geophysics survey techniques was provided to African and local professionals in conjunction with UNESCO training initiatives in KAIRIM. It's fundamental to work together for the protection of underwater cultural heritage in Africa and for the development of science and professional competence towards that goal. And thank you very much. Hello?
Thank you very much, Ricardo. You took much less than 10 minutes, which is great. And thank you very much for that interesting presentation. We are running out of time, but we'll ask that we just have a few minutes to have a discussion. Maybe Ricardo, not Ricardo, but Arturo can give us direction of how long we have to have discussions. I can see some conversations happening on chat, and so that we can be able to conclude in good time. Arturo, might you give us some direction on that?
I think, we can spend some 5-10 minutes maximum for questions to the last presentations and case studies, and then we can just finish the workshop then.
Okay, so we open it to questions. Now, I've seen some comments. Perhaps somebody can speak up on while we look at the comments and see which ones need to be responded to.
There was a hand raised by Felipe Alash.
Okay, thank you. My question is, I want to know a little bit about your experience in Kenya and Tanzania of the uses of archaeological objects. For example, the ceramic. I'm in Mozambique, and here in Mozambique we have a problem of uses of the ceramic to make art objects, and we know that it's not a good practice to archaeological objects. So I would like to know a little bit about your experience there, and how you deal with that. And on the other part, I didn't understand on the Mark presentation. You said that it talked about the discovery of new shipwrecks and the need to expand the classified area. I didn't understand quite well, because when we discover a shipwreck on the World Heritage Site, maybe it's on the buffer zone and not exactly on the core area. So I would like to understand a little bit what you said about that. Thank you.
Who would be happy to respond to that among the different presenters? Please go ahead. Mark, is that you?
Yes, I'll comment on the, as it were, reuse of archaeological artifacts. I'm very open about this. I think that the material culture that we're excavating, we've produced so much of it, and it just sits in boxes in museums and nobody ever sees it again. And once it's gone through the full scientific process, it would seem to me that repurposing it for art, indeed putting on museum displays or whatever, is a perfectly legitimate process. In fact, it should be encouraged, because it brings this material into much more public engagement. And I think it's a fabulous idea, and I don't think we should be precious at all.
Yeah, maybe in addition to what Mark has said, it's more or less the same here in Tanzania. Many of the archaeological materials, they are taken in the National Museum where they are being deposited, and the majority are in boxes. At some point, only very few are put on display. But with the Kilwa case, the materials that we recovered, we didn't recover a lot because of the potential of these kind of materials. They are very, very nice, complete pots on the seabed, and therefore we recovered some of the materials for studying purposes, and many of them were already attacked by the sea, so they are almost covered. So we had to treat some, and some of these materials which we recovered and treated, they are now within the site museum, giving the opportunity for the public to have a look and see what is happening. But a large part of the cargo is still on the seabed. We did not recover it. We think it is much more safe there than recovering it.
Brilliant, brilliant. No, thank you for those responses. Is there anybody else who has a question?
Could I respond to John Cooper's point? I don't know if John Cooper's still here.
On the fishing?
On the fishing.
I saw the discussion on the fishing, and I thought
had a bit of an argy here.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's a very difficult and obviously a very, as it were, wider ethical issue as well. But should we be encouraging moving away from traditional practices? Should this be government policy to do so? For example, in supplying traditional fishermen with outboard motors, large ring nets, and so forth. A lot of this is as a result of government intervention in the fishing industry to try and improve the productivity. And I think that it needs to be looked at a policy level rather than necessarily denying fishermen the right to earn a living. Of course, that's the last thing that anybody would want to do. But the real knock-on effect of plastic boats, plastic engines, and nets is that the whole value chain that goes with traditional fishing will disappear as a result.
All right, thank you. The tension on those two extremes is clear, and I think that conversation and debate will continue for sure. I see that I know my friend Dipesh has put out his link to his work, the DAO, and I see Purity is asking a question on community-based creative economic activities. I wonder whether anybody can talk about specifically rising from the depth project investigators. Anybody can talk about some of the community-based creative economic activities that the projects have identified?
Yeah, I can if you want.
Yes, please.
Hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is something we're asked time and time again about creating actual cash inflow from projects. And it's something that's really important in terms of moving from aspirational ideas of what heritage can do for people to something that's actually tangible. And then we've got that, it's something that we can present, obviously, to government and to interested national organizations. And we're at the process now that 27 projects are finished or are finishing, some are still finishing, and we're beginning to gather some of the results together. And a number of our projects, not all of them, but a number of them are community-led projects where they're using heritage, the marine heritage around them, to try some form of economic income, economic benefit, as well as social and cultural benefits. The one in Kenya that you probably heard about is the one that Cesar Bita has been running, in Maida Creek, creating pathways to not only resilience to climate change, but also activities based around ecotourism in the creek, using the archaeological survey that was done there as places to visit. Also activities in terms of mitigation against climate change, from mangrove plantations to selling some of the saplings from that as well. And they've been actually quite successful in developing a sustainable income so far based around that activity, which is developing. Equally, Frida Nikroti at the British Institute of East Africa has done one working with women's groups along the Tanzanian coast, looking at traditional technologies and selling some of those. That's really a kind of scoping phase, but they have had some form of income coming from that as well. There are also projects, I know that Ichu, who's been here, and John Cooper and their project in Tanzania, the Bahari Yetu Urithi Wetu project, has been working with fishing communities, and particularly around boat building. And there's a boat building community workshop now that I believe has some income around it, in that they've had commissions to build boats and so on. So there are a number of projects, and the ones I can think of off the top of my head. And when we have these kind of bottom-up community-led projects, we also have top-down projects where we have lawyers looking at the effectiveness of aid income coming into the country. Daria DeViti is looking at in Lamu, and I think that's quite important as well, because it's identifying where some of this cash is coming in, is how much of that trickles down into the local communities, and that's something we hope to have metrics on as well. But from the community-based side, Yes, it is happening. One of the things we haven't seen so much is quite a developed tourism element to it in some of these places, and part of that's capacity, part of it's the nature of tourism, actually excluding local people. That's something I know that Ichu's come across in some of the Tanzanian projects. John Cooper and Ichu have just published a paper where there's a photograph of a sign telling the local people to get off the beach when tourists are there, so that they don't interact with them. And some of the attitudes perhaps of some of the local hotels could be improved with more interaction with community and more interaction with the heritage, the living cultural heritage of these communities, rather than something that you just turn up and take a photograph of and leave again. So these are all things we're hoping to report on, and it's we're at the beginnings of this. This is the beginnings of the network. We're hoping that a lot of this activity will create more activity, create more sustainable activity. I know in Mozambique, for example, Solange Makamo has a project with Paul Lane, where they're developing a biocultural heritage park. So it works in lots of different levels, if you like. And starting to change that narrative, I think, that's what we're doing by actually having metrics for the first time in some ways to actually say what this stuff can do. And I think just to bring it back to maybe to the World Heritage element, part of the action plan, the World Heritage Action Plan of 2021 to 2027, is to focus on community and stakeholder engagement for the management of World Heritage properties. So there is a change happening where we're recognizing the roles of communities. We've seen it in Lamu as well, with the problems that projects had has caused major delays to developers. They'll see that and see that if they had better cooperation and communication with local communities, they could have avoided some of that. And basically, this kind of development is not sustainable unless it's supported by local communities. It cannot be sustainable in the long term unless it's including local communities. So Rising from the Depths has been about developing a number of these people-centered and community-driven projects. And I'm wondering now that World Heritage management plans are also moving towards a kind of community focus, if they can also look at co-creation, value-led management. I now realize I'm turning into a huge presentation, which wasn't my wasn't my intention. I'll stop now. But
I think I can say, yeah.
Yeah, do look at our website, and we will be putting up these outcomes as they come in, and particularly around community incomes. Sorry to have taken so long.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I was about to tell you your 10 minutes are up, so. I just want to ask if there's one more burning question, because definitely we are out of time. But if there's one more question, we can take it. And if not, if no indication, then I think that we can call this a very successful and very engaging workshop. In closing, I will really want to thank every participant who has participated, both from listening and to asking questions, or to even putting their comments or their projects on the chat, but also the presenters who have really had and presented very enriching and rich presentations that that unfortunately we had to rush through, because of course it would have been much better to be able to actually listen through the whole presentation, but I apologize that we had to rush through so that we can be able to keep the time. And really thanks to the organizers, Arturo, and the Rising from the Depths team, as well as the UNESCO team, for putting together this very, very interesting and engaging conversation and workshop. This is never the end. This is a conversation that continues. The dilemmas, the challenges, the opportunities continue to be with us. So the more we are able to put our heads together and discuss issues, the better. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for participating, and I'll now push the floor to Arturo to close properly, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edith. I don't think, I need to do an official closing. You already did it on behalf of UNESCO and John on behalf of Rising from the Depths. Just again, thank you very much to all the participants for the comments. And yeah, let's continue the discussion. Thank you very much to all. Have a very nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.